Distinguished delegates, presenters, and participants from SAARC member states and regions around the world, good morning, and I welcome you all on behalf of SAARC Energy Center. Thank you for joining us today on the video conference on the roadmap for the implementation of SAARC Framework Agreement on Energy Cooperation and Electricity. My name is Ahmed Talha, and I am currently working as Research Fellow Technology Transfer at SAARC Energy Center, Islamabad. I'll be moderating today's session, and with me I have Mr. Tularam Kudal as the co-moderator. I'm extremely grateful to our panelists for today. We shall be joined by Mr. Jeevan Sharma from ADB, Mr. Subhrajit Datta Ray, and Mr. Sambit Kumar Dash from PricewaterhouseCoopers India, Mr. Rajiv Ratna Panda from USAID South Asia Regional Initiative for Energy Integration at Integrated Research and Action for Development, and Mr. Abrar Hussain from Central Power Purchasing Agency, Pakistan. I shall be introducing them before the start of their presentations. Dear audience, we have been graced by the presence of Deputy Director, SAARC Energy Center, Dr. Shoaib Ahmed. Thank you, sir, for joining us today, and I would like to request you to please open the session with your welcome remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ahmed. Dear participants and presenters of the video conference, friends and colleagues. Assalamu alaikum, a very good morning. I, Dr. Shoaib Ahmed, on behalf of Director SAARC Energy Center, welcome you all to this video conference on roadmap for implementation of SAARC Framework Agreement on Energy Cooperation. It's a great honor for me to open this discussion on this key technical topic, which is a focal area of SAARC Energy Center's strategic plan. Dear participants, the SAARC Energy Center is a regional institute on energy and technical arm of the SAARC Organization on Energy Matters. It's our endeavor to translate the energy vision of SAARC leadership into reality and the betterment of the people of the SAARC. The center started its operations in year 2008. During last 12 years, the center has emerged as a vibrant and effective SAARC institute, which has played its role in all regional level energy initiatives. Until now, the center has carried out more than 140 interventions. The reports of these interventions are available on Center's website free of cost for everybody and all. Dear participants, recognizing the importance of electricity in promoting economic growth and improving the quality of life, SAARC Framework Agreement for Energy Cooperation was signed in year 2014. Adoption of this agreement is a crucial step towards a regional market for electricity. The key objectives of this agreement are to improve power availability in the entire region and facilitate integrated operation of the regional power grid. The agreement contains broad-ranging provisions like non-discriminatory access to transmission, market-based pricing of electricity traded, and establishment of a body for coordination of regional power trade. Dear participants, SAARC Energy Center, along with other regional organizations, has been actively playing its role for implementation of SAARC Framework Agreement. The center proposed a roadmap for implementation of this framework agreement, as well as suggested some relevant interventions at various regional forums. SAC has also conducted numerous other activities to highlight the importance of this framework agreement and support energy cooperation among the SAARC member countries. Dear participants, in this video conference, we have experts from Asian Development Bank, PricewaterhouseCoopers of India, USAID South Asian Regional Initiative for Energy Integration, and Central Power Purchasing Agency of Pakistan, who have all been working on various aspects of SAARC Framework Agreement. I am delighted to acknowledge the great cooperation and the work done by all of them. In the end, I once again thank you all for joining the video conference and shall request you to feel free in expressing your opinions. I would like to extend my special thanks to the presenters of Asian Development Bank, PwC, SAARC, and CCPA of Pakistan. Lastly, I wish you all a very comfortable learning and knowledge sharing session. With these words, I formally declare the session open. Now I request Mr. Ahmed Allah to take us through the remaining agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words and well wishes. Dear audience, before proceeding with the agenda, I would like to draw your attention towards certain things related to this video conference. Please note that the agenda of this video conference is already available on SSC website, and you can also access it through the GoToWebinar panel on your screen in the handout section. All the presentations, the brief report, and its recording link will be also uploaded on SSC website. There will be a brief Q&A session after each presentation. Participants will have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters by typing questions under the question tab on the GoToWebinar panel on your screens. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentations. I shall be asking questions on your behalf. However, if you prefer, we can also allow you to directly interact with our presenters. In that case, we shall request you to share your camera. Kindly indicate the mode of asking while sending in your questions. Due to time limitation, we apologize in advance if we are unable to address your question. Dear audience, to set up a background for the discussion, I'll start this video conference by presenting the draft roadmap for the implementation of SAARC Framework Agreement prepared by SAARC Energy Center and the relevant activities that the center has conducted in relation to this roadmap. I'll start a brief introduction to SEC, followed by the background of SAARC Framework Agreement on Energy Cooperation. The last part of my presentation will be related to the draft roadmap prepared by SEC for the implementation of this SAARC Framework Agreement and the activities conducted by SEC in relation to the proposed roadmap. SEC was created through Dhaka Declaration in 2005 as a special purpose vehicle to realize the vision of SAARC leaders to establish an energy ring. It started its journey in 2006. Next. Started its journey in March 2006 in Islamabad and became functional in 2008. The primary objective for the establishment of SEC is to have the regional institution of excellence for initiation, coordination, and facilitation of SAARC programs in energy. The SEC is funded by all the member states and supervised by a governing board comprising of all the member states. The professional staff of SEC is selected from the member states through selection committee meeting, and expert services for specialized tasks are outsourced. Next. The mandate of SEC is to initiate, coordinate, and facilitate regional activities on energy to realize energy trade. SEC is also responsible to provide technical inputs for activities on energy. SEC helps in the integration of regional energy strategies by providing relevant information and expertise. By enhancing the capacity of professionals from SAARC member states and facilitate regional energy cooperation, SEC aims to continue its role as a catalyst for the economic growth and development of SAARC region. Next. Moving on, we'll cover the background of the SAARC Frame Agreement. Next. SAARC vision on energy has always been to promote multilateral energy trade agreements for the economic benefit of the whole SAARC region. Next. To achieve those multilateral trade agreements, SAARC leaders envisioned SAARC Energy Ring at the 2004 SAARC Summit. SEC is playing its role its part for the realization of this goal by planning activities that promote regional energy trade, such as today's video conference. In addition, SAARC Working Group on Energy constituted 4 expert groups on oil and gas, electricity, renewable energy, and technology transfer to accelerate the process of regional cooperation. This is next. This is an overview of this regional powering envisioned by the SAARC leaders. Next. And similarly, you can see the gas grid which is being envisioned. Important prerequisites for this proposed SAARC energy ring are enabling environment for trade through harmonization of regulatory regimes, build power interconnections, transmission lines and pipelines, and regional energy generation centers wherever possible, and establish and operate regional power and gas market. Over the years, some bilateral agreements and MOUs between SAARC member states were signed. However, in November 2014, a landmark breakthrough came in the form of SAARC framework agreement to move closer to the realization of the SAARC energy ring. Next. This agreement was the first of its own on SAARC region level. It made all the member states realize the importance of energy cooperation and resulting economic benefits, and urged them to develop necessary laws and regulations for the promotion of regional energy trade. Next. I'll now talk about the draft roadmap prepared by SEC. The SAARC energy regulators, SAARC energy regulators recommended the formation of Council of Experts of Energy Regulators Electricity to accelerate the implementation of SAARC framework agreement. SEC has been an active member of the Council of Experts of Energy Regulators Electricity since its inception. SEC developed and presented the roadmap and suggested potential interventions for successful implementation of SAARC framework agreement that I'll be sharing with you. Next. The critical prerequisites identified in the roadmap for the SAARC framework agreement implementation are ratification of the SAARC framework agreement by all member states is critical. So far, Pakistan is yet to ratify this agreement. Enabling environment for cross-border electricity trade that includes identification of areas for interventions following best practices. Capacity building, it will be an evolving process. It will require need assessment through various implementation stages of SAARC framework agreement, explore training opportunities, and manage finances and organize trainings as we move on with the implementation. Next. The potential interventions suggested by SEC for SAARC framework agreement are listed here. Next. Or along with the reference to the corresponding articles of SAARC framework agreement. SEC has already conducted studies related to duties and taxes, and also related to the data updating and sharing. ADB is working on studies related to the transmission system. Next. Here you can see the remaining interventions. Next. SEC has already conducted study related to dispute settlement mechanism. SEC has also conducted training of professionals from Afghanistan on power regulatory system in 2019, and ADB is currently working on regulatory mechanism. The three studies that I highlighted before are already conducted by SEC in order to accelerate the implementation of SAARC framework agreement are summarized here. I'll share the summary next. Here's a summary of the report with reference to this SFA article, which is presented. With this study, the two objectives have been met in full spirit, which is to identify, collect, and study the current relevant documents, and study and determine the gaps with respect to initiation of CBET. The objective of critical exemption is still under consideration by the respective governments. Next. The second study which SEC conducted was to study for defining and making consensus on minimum set of technical data information on the electricity sector to promote cross-border electricity trade. With this study, the two objectives that have been completed are to identify, collect, and study best regional international practices and develop a minimum set of technical data which has to be shared by the member states on periodical basis. The member states can further deliberate on the minimum set shared, and then they can further improve it as we move along. Next. And the third important study that the SEC conducted in relation to the SAARC framework agreement is to develop a dispute settlement mechanism in case of any dispute between the member states. A template has been developed and has been shared with the member states for their perusal. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. We'll now move to our first session from ADB. The audience shall now welcome Mr. Jeevan Sharma from ADB, Mr. Subrajit Dattare and Mr. Sambit Kumar Dash from PricewaterhouseCoopers India. Mr. Jeevan Acharya is working in the Energy Division of South Asia Department of Asian Development Bank as Principal Energy Specialist. He currently focuses on developing and implementing energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other broader energy sector projects in India and Nepal. He is also serving as the focal person for regional cooperation and integration for energy in South Asia. He is a key member of ADB's Energy Sector Group and Climate Change team and was responsible for overseeing ADB's several key initiatives, including Energy for All and low carbon technology transfer, among others. Prior to joining ADB, Mr. Acharya was Senior Research Officer in Winrock International in Kathmandu, Nepal, covering climate change, carbon financing, energy access, and broader clean energy areas. Mr. Acharya is also is a Nepalese national, has a Master's of Arts in Economics, Master of Science in Energy Systems and Management, and a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering. Mr. Subrajit Datta is a Director with Energy Utilities and Resource Practice of PwC India. He brings over 14 years of experience in power sector engagements in South Asia, Southeast Asia and Central Asia across areas such as power sector policy and regulatory, cross-border power trade, institutional strengthening and capacity development, bid advisory, support and sector planning. He also advised Council of Experts of Energy Regulators in conducting knowledge sharing sessions on case studies in regulatory evolution in various other regions globally. Recently, Mr. Subrajit has assisted Ministry of Energy and Mines, Government of Lao, PDR in developing reform option for legal, regulatory and institutional frameworks, supporting the improvement of the IPP process and implementation of PSHT. Our third presenter in this session will be Mr. Sambit Kumar. He is an Associate Director with the Energy Utilities and Resource Practice of PwC India. He brings over 11 years of experience in power sector engagements across South and Southeast Asia and areas related to cross-border regional projects, including carry out commercial and financial economic feasibility assessment, long-term demand supply assessment, private sector participation, power sector policy and regulations. Sambit has extensively worked with multilaterals in promotions of regional cooperation in SAARC and Greater Mekong sub-region. He has assisted Asian Development Bank in strengthening the power systems key frameworks. Thank you, Mr. Jeevan, Mr. Subrajit, and Mr. Sambit for your joining us today. You may now begin your presentation.
Thank you, Ahmed. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Ahmed for a very nice introduction for all of us. And before I begin, let me first of all express our appreciation to SAARC Energy Center for organizing this session, which has been, it is very important and very timely, and also inviting us to make a presentation and share our perspective in this important area. So what we plan to do is I will share some of impressions or our activities in this area from ADB side, and then our colleagues from the PwC will give a little bit more details of some of the analytical work that we have done in this topic of SAARC Framework Agreement, Energy Cooperation, Electricity here in South Asia region. Next slide, please. So as you can see in the content, we'll talk about power sector overview of South Asia and also technical challenges, commercial challenges, system operation challenges, institutional challenges, and then the challenges in regional power exchange. And it is very important to understand why we have what kind of challenges that we all have, so that appropriate measures can be introduced to that to address those challenges. And of course, during our presentation, we'll also share some of our thoughts and suggestions as well. Next slide, please. You can go to the next slide again. Yeah, so ADB being a development partner for South Asian countries and of course our other member countries as well, we feel that it is important and critical for us to engage with all of our countries in their aspirations in addressing their own challenges in the energy sector, but at the same time, regional also help promote a regional cooperation with their neighbors. We always try to respond to the request and need of our member countries, developing member countries, and then based on their requests and based on their suggestions, then we come up with our, either it's a technical assistance or investments or any kind of a policy dialogues as needed, or we can contribute. We come forward with our such support. Given the importance of this regional cooperation in the energy sector in South Asia, ADB has been engaged from a very, very long time with the different means and different tools. These are some of the examples of what we have been doing starting from 2005. We have this SAARC regional energy trade, and the objective here is to promote regional trade and cooperation agreements, roadmaps for harmonizations of legal and regulatory frameworks. And us being a financial institution, we always try to link it with the need for the financing, and then how can ADB finance those activities, or also help mobilize financing from other sources as well. And then in 2011 and 13, from 11 to 13, we also had a study on South Asia Regional Power Exchange. And then here we're looking at various possibilities for regional cooperation power exchange from various countries, and look at also the regulatory framework as well. And in 2014 to 17, we also had one regional technical assistance to look at this, to do the study of the SAARC electricity transmission master plan. And of course, by the name, we can see that the idea here is to develop some kind of master plan for the region, and then help develop that further, keeping in mind of the country's aspirations, country's need, and then also that their power evacuation requirements as well. This does not include our other bilateral activities that we have done, whether it's between India and Bangladesh, or whether it's Bhutan and India, and then also in other countries as well. But the important thing is that SAARC is a very important region, and then a lot is happening, a lot more can happen. And then we see this as a great opportunity for us to help and contribute in that effort as per the wish of the member countries. At the same time, we have already financed several regional interconnection projects, whether that's from Bhutan to India. These are Dagachu, Nikachu projects, and also India-Bangladesh interconnections as well. This just to give a few examples that it's not just a study, but based on the output of those studies, we are also financing those at the request of these governments. I think also Ahmad mentioned that earlier in his introduction that ADB is also providing support to the SAARC Council of Experts for Energy Regulators on various regulatory coordination issues and implementation of SAARC framework agreement. What we believe is that, and of course, this financing is important, but the technical assessments are important, but at the same time, this regulation also play a very, very important role. And unless and until we address those regulatory bottlenecks, we may not be able to achieve this objective of regional cooperation. And then here, what is also important is that every country is sovereign in their nature, and they have their own regulatory regime, environment, and then we have to respect every country's situation, and then try to facilitate where there is a win-win for all the participating countries there. And then it has been an extremely effective way of bringing all these regulators together and then address these concerns there. Next slide, please. We also have one ongoing regional technical assistance to support these SAARC member countries, which is a kind of a sub-regional South Asian countries region. And we are also using that technical assistance to provide continuous support for SAARC countries and others as needed. So the objective here is, the enhancing this regional cooperation in the energy sector. And then we also have this SAARC vision and also SAARC operational plan. Here we want to focus a little bit more towards, the regional project assessment, whether that's requiring feasibility studies, safeguards, and others, and develop further our regional master plan. The one that I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of updating that master plan as well, and also capacity building through knowledge sharing workshops, and also the energy, these regulators that I mentioned earlier, to have a further studies, and then also to help operationalize of SAARC framework agreement, and also regional framework for energy cooperation as well. So here, what is important is that, of course, we have organized various workshops every now and then we in fact have planned for one event in Islamabad, but because of this COVID, we had to postpone it. But maybe later on we can also organize that one once it opens up. See, what is important for us is that the needs are huge. There are a lot of things already happening, so we want to avoid any duplication of those efforts, and also work with other development partners as well, whether that's with USAID, the SAARC program that IRADE is implementing, and also with the World Bank, and also other development partners as well. So we will continue doing it through various means here. So next slide, please. We also have this, we're also supporting this SAARC Power Trade Working Group, which we've also found it very effective way of bringing the key people from these countries, and then have a detailed discussion about their priority projects, and also if they have any capacity building related needs, we can also help doing it. So we also organize this kind of meetings every now and then, and I think the next working group meeting is happening on the 14th of October. And of course, it will be a virtual this time. Obviously, we miss meeting face to face because there the informal discussion and exchange of ideas happen, which are very important. We are missing, but anyway, the current situation is beyond all of our control. So here we are focusing on this assisting in mobilizing funds for the priority projects. And ADB ourselves being a financial institution, it gives us a lot of comfort that we also engage in this process, and then the project readiness are much higher if it comes through the regular process of identification, development, and also other bottlenecks if those have already been addressed. That makes it easier. And then we also provide that kind of a platform for all these colleagues from various countries to sit down together and then identify issues and also look at various ways of addressing those. I think in ADB would always, just provide a platform for bringing together and then have that discussion. And of course, it will be up to the countries to decide how best they want to take it forward. In that process, if they want some more assistance in doing some additional studies or knowledge sharing events or site visit, field visits, I think we always help to do that one. And then we are also maintaining and SAARC also priority projects, and we do update that one on a regular basis, so that it's good for ADB and also for the other development partners to come and finance those projects at the request of the countries. Next slide, please. So let me stop it here. So this basically. I want to reiterate that ADB being a development partner for all the South Asian countries, we remain committed and then also always look for ways to support all the agencies, whether it's a SAARC Center or also all of our member countries in South Asia, to help meet their aspirations and also plans there. And we have an active energy sector program in all of our countries, and I think there are, the system is in place, there are processes are in place, the countries and especially our energy ministries are very much aware of getting any support, how to get from ADB, and in fact all of us we are working very closely in that way. So we'd like to continue doing it, and then I want to reiterate our continued support in this effort here. So now I pass on to my colleagues from PwC to give some little bit more details of some of the analytical work that we have done as a part of our support for the South Asian countries, and then we'll be happy to respond if you have any other questions and so on. So PwC colleagues, over to you. So thank you once again for the opportunity to the SAARC Energy Center. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words, and I hope that the ADB continues the cooperative activities that they are conducting. Over to you, Mr. Subrajit. You may begin your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Tala, and thanks, Mr. Jeevan, for setting the context so beautifully. A very good afternoon and good morning also to some parts of the world, to all the audiences. How we will present the rest of the presentation is basically we'll provide a very quick overview of South Asian power sector and how regional cross-border power trade and regional cooperation in energy sector is something that is inherent in how the sector is structured. We will then move on to discuss the SAARC framework agreement, pick up certain aspects of the framework agreement, discuss briefly on the challenges and the way forward. So moving on to the next slide. So basically, if we see regional cooperation is something that is very imperative to meet the common aspiration of countries in a particular region or sub-region. Regional cooperation helps in enhancing energy security in a region, provide more affordable energy sources as well as sustainable energy sources. So there was a study conducted by the Asian Development Bank in 2012, which brought out that energy cooperation, regional energy cooperation rather in the GMS region can help in saving around $200 billion in terms of investment over a period of 2005-25. The paper also looked at other regions. So for example, the CASA 1000 project was looked at, and it was estimated that an economic value of $97 billion can be gained from implementation of this project. Similarly, for Europe, it was estimated around 7 to 10% of generation capacity costs can be reduced through enhanced economic cooperation. In fact, for Europe, it was estimated that it has already been done, and around 7 to 10% of cost has been saved. Similarly, in a North American context, it was estimated around $20 billion has been saved because of the cooperation in the PJM region. So if we see the SAARC power sector, 2 or 3 things come across very clearly. One is the dependence of many of the countries on a particular source of generation. And second is also the seasonal pattern of generation in many of the countries. Apart from that, the other factors that can be looked at is the variance in per capita electricity consumption. Overall, the region is still quite lower than the global average of 2,700, around 2,700. And there is a wide variance. Similarly, if we see the energy access figures, though some countries like India, Bangladesh have made remarkable progress in the last 8 to 10 years, still there is a wide variance, and some of the countries have really low energy access and per capita electricity consumption. In terms of having single source of energy, many countries still now, for example, Bangladesh was dependent on a single source. India was predominantly dependent on coal. Now, all the countries are moving towards renewable energy sources. So, number one, to diverse the energy sources, regional cooperation can play a major role. Number two, if we see the seasonal pattern, the countries, hydropower generation countries like Nepal, Bhutan, the kind of electricity they can produce through their hydropower resources in the wet season can definitely be very useful for countries like Bangladesh when there is a summer season in these countries. Number 3 is the renewable energy sources enhancement. So all the countries have large-scale renewable capacity addition plan. India is targeting 450 gigawatt by 2030. Bangladesh around 8 gigawatt. Pakistan has 16 gigawatt renewable energy capacity plan addition plans. Sri Lanka aims to achieve around 50% of its generation through renewable energy sources in the next 10-12 years. So all this will also bring to the forefront the need for having balancing services, and hydropower can provide such balancing services for large-scale variable renewable energy integration. So this again emphasizes why regional cooperation should be very useful, where the countries like Nepal and Bhutan can supply those balancing sources before battery storage becomes more prevalent, and further emphasizes the need for regional energy cooperation. The other point remains that reducing carbon footprint, which again emphasizes why the countries are moving towards renewable energy. So all these factors were considered, and in 2014, the SAARC framework agreement was signed between the SAARC member countries as one of the key steps to move towards more concerted effort to bring in regional cooperation in power sector in the SAARC region. So after the SAARC agreement, many other agreements were also signed between individual countries like India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, etc. Many other initiatives also came to the forefront. But the SAARC framework agreement remains one of the key milestones and one of the key documents which provides an overarching guidance on how regional cooperation can move towards in this region. So moving on to the next slide. As I mentioned, in 2014, the SAARC framework agreement was signed. The objective was the participating member nations were Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. One of the key objectives was enabling cross-border trade of electricity on voluntary basis, subject to laws, rules, regulations of the respective member states. This was a very important point that the agreement identified at the very beginning, that the member countries need to be given the independence to go ahead with their power sector development plans as per their country specific requirements, so that there is no lack of synchronization in moving ahead. And the other important things that the framework agreement laid down was important principles where the member nations needs to agree, staying within the bound of their domestic laws and regulations. So these important principles, or what we are calling salient features of the framework agreement, includes non-discriminatory access to transmission grids for the purpose of cross-border electricity trade, international coordination in transmission interconnection planning, system operations and energy accounting, promotion of information sharing between the member states, encouraging the member states to undertake sector reforms to enhance the sector sustainability, and develop structures and institutional frameworks to resolve the regulatory issues. So two things come out here. One is the important features that were identified as the bare minimum principles to move ahead with regional cooperations was something that that basically goes along very well with moving towards a competitive electricity market structure. And all the countries were already aiming at that point of time, and even now. So the discrepancy, if any, was between the country's internal requirements and the requirement of the region was avoided by these 5 principles. The second important point that comes into discussion is that since this agreement has been signed, as I mentioned also in my previous slide, many other discussions and individual level bilateral agreements were signed between the countries and discussed, and many regional projects were also undertaken for development. In fact, if we see, since 2012, the volume of regional power trade in this region has increased almost 3 times. So definitely the SAARC framework agreement was an important starting milestone which laid down the future roadmap for how to move ahead with cross-border power trade in the region. So moving on to the next slide. So if we see the implementation of this framework agreement still needs us to address several challenges. We have bucketed this into 5 broad groups: technical challenges, commercial challenges, system operation, institutional challenges, and challenges for moving towards a regional power exchange or more a multilateral form of power trade. If we see, if we consider the, and we'll discuss all of this in the subsequent slides. Me and my colleague will take you through the key aspects of all these challenges and the road ahead in the subsequent slides. But if we broadly see technical challenges, commercial challenges, and system operation challenges, all of this needs a coordinated institutional mechanism to address these challenges. And similarly, if you are to move towards a regional power exchange, then all the preceding factors, the technical aspects, so for example, harmonization of regulations, non-discriminatory access, coordinated planning, commercial aspects like sharing of transmission pricing charges, transmission charges, competitive pricing regime for cross-border power trade, for tariff discovery, system operation aspects like congestion management, having common operational guidelines, and of course the institutional issues are imperative to move towards a regional power exchange where multilateral trade can happen. So I'll not spend more time on this slide because, as I mentioned, we will go through the details of each of these challenges in the subsequent slides. So we can move on to first to the technical challenges. Yeah, next slide, please. So how we are structuring this section is we are taking up the key articles of the SAARC framework agreement, trying to take you through what is the current status and what are the challenges, share some international examples which are relevant, and then give a way ahead, suggest a way ahead for discussion. So in terms of technical challenges, Article 7 of the SAARC framework agreement talks about planning of cross-border interconnection, enabling the transmission planning agencies of the respective member states governments to plan cross-border interconnections through mutual agreements. And Article 8 talks about build, operate, and maintenance of transmission lines. So enabling the transmission agencies to build, own, operate, maintain associated systems of cross-border interconnections within their respective national boundaries. So what is the current status? We all know currently in this region, we are only seeing bilateral arrangements. There are discussions on some of the trilateral arrangements. So for example, Nepal selling power to Bangladesh through India, but those are still at a very initial stages. There is a lack of regional transmission planning and project implementation to optimize investments on regional level. National institutions are mainly driving development of the interconnections. Cross-border interconnections are planned on a case-to-case basis. So, I mean, if we just take the current status and try to understand what are the challenges in implementing the SAARC framework agreement, number one, there is no guidelines available for transmission planning for trilateral or multi-country power trade. Again, this brings to the forefront the lack of probably an institutional mechanism to drive this regional transmission planning process. There are no guidelines or clarity regarding how cross-country investments can be facilitated. So we have seen India and Bhutan jointly investing in a lot of projects. But for example, if India and Bangladesh together are to invest in a project in Bhutan for selling power to both India and Bangladesh, then how the things will evolve. So those guidelines have clarity still to be evolved or worked upon. And of course, there is no regional transmission master plan. Each of the countries have their own transmission master plan. But synchronizing this transmission master plan to optimize investments is something that needs to be looked at. So moving ahead to the next slide, if we look at the GMS region, which is the Greater Mekong sub-region, so this is another, sorry, before going to that, there are two other. So Article 10 of the SAARC framework agreement also talks about electricity grid protection system. So a joint development of coordinated network protection system incidental to cross-border interconnection. Transmission access, I think we talked about this, non-discriminatory access to the transmission grids as per applicable laws of the countries. So current status, there are no common grid code on network regulations. With regards to transmission access, India is the only country which has in its national law talking about open access frameworks. It is not operationalized in the other countries. Right now, whatever bilateral transactions we are seeing between India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and India, Bhutan, so no open access is required for power export from India to Nepal and Bhutan, as Bangladesh, as Nepal and Bangladesh are buyers. And for Bhutan, it is mostly through dedicated transmission lines. So the open access frameworks are still not come into the picture. But as we mentioned, as we move towards a trilateral trading arrangement or multilateral, this is something that needs to be put in place. So the challenges that we see are absence of harmonization, which may lead to difficulties in system operation because of a lack of uniform grid protection system. Lack of open access regulations will hinder access of transmission and distribution infrastructure to facilitate and move towards the next stage of CBET. So now moving on, as we to the next slide, as we are talking about the GMS region. Now, if you see the GMS region, again, consisted of countries like Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, etc. And there also, there was similar complementary energy resources between the countries, which brought about the necessity for regional cooperation, which would be beneficial for all the countries. So ADB has been supporting this program from 1992. And the Regional Power Trade Coordination Committee, a very important institution under the overall GMS framework, was established way back in 2002 under Article 4 of the Intergovernmental Agreement. Later on, the RPTCC helped in drafting the Regional Power Trade Operating Arrangement Agreement. This was approved in 2005, and various working groups were established under the RPTCC for taking up the initiatives to address the technical, system operational, and planning investment related challenges. These working groups have done exceedingly well and have come up with various roadmaps and principles on many aspects which are important for cross-border power trade. So, for example, the GMS region already has a roadmap on transmission pricing methodologies. Technical assistance is provided to countries on regulatory issues, transmission company arrangements, system operations, billing charge calculations, etc. The GMS performance standards were adopted as a reference document in June 2016. Regional transmission regulations came up in December 2017. Substantial work in progress, work is in progress on areas like metering arrangement, communication arrangement, protection systems, the uniform GMS grid code, having a regional master plan. So what is important to learn from the GMS region was that from the very onset, they had a clear roadmap on how they would go ahead from a bilateral trading arrangement to a multilateral trading arrangement. The other important aspect probably is, unlike say a European Union power trading arrangement or a West Africa power pool arrangement, they did not have regional regulators or such kind of institutions which can create some sort of confusion, which is also beneficial in certain contexts, as we have seen in Europe and West Africa, but in the GMS geopolitical context might have created challenges. So the entire thing was driven by a cross-country institutions like the RPTCC, under which several working groups were formulated. So moving ahead to the next slide. Now, if we see how do we go about addressing the key technical challenges in our region. So again, we have bucketed into three broad groups: harmonization of regulatory frameworks and grid frameworks. So the actions that are required is recognition of cross-border power trade in each country's laws and regulations. So India, for example, in 2018 came up with the guidelines for cross-border electricity policy, and then subsequently the regulations and the rules of business were also initiated and informed. Similarly, I mean, if you see early this year, India came up with this electricity bill amendment bill for amending the Electricity Act 2003, which clearly specifies that cross-border power trade will be conducted under the supervision of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. This gives a recognition to cross-border power trade in India's prime regulation regarding electricity. Similarly, there is a need to introduce clarity in regulations for promoting cross-country investments for the much-needed cross-border infrastructure. Formulation of common grid code covering connection arrangements, operating parameters, scheduling, dispatching code, initially starting with partial adoption by member states and subsequently modification of national grid codes to move to a full adoption is very important. So some of the development partners like USAID is working towards these arrangements and trying to help the respective member countries on how to achieve these objectives. Open access, again, introduction of open access in the legislative framework of nations is very important where it does not exist. There needs to be more clarity regarding treatment of open access for cross-border power trade. Defining features and eligibility criteria for connectivity and open access, for example, types of open access, what could be the tenures and the priority of providing the open access. This needs to be clearly laid down. Again, India has these rules, but similar rules needs to be developed for a regional basis, on a regional basis. Fixation of open access charges, what would be the procedure for granting connectivity of open access, including the institutional setups and the timelines. Establishing operational and commercial mechanisms also are very important way ahead action that needs to be taken up to address the technical challenges. Creation or development of a regional transmission infrastructure plan. So formulation of a coordinated regional planning. One very important step was the formation of the joint working groups, which now regularly meets on transmission planning. But still, there is a need for requirement of regional planning on how the development of transmission infrastructure and even regional projects can be coordinated, and the investments cost can be optimized. The mechanism, the institutional mechanisms is very important. So, for example, how the planners can work together to develop synergistic development of power infrastructure, taking into account both national and regional priorities. The development of this national transmission plan should also take into consideration the transmission infrastructure requirements to facilitate cross-border electricity trade. So these are some of the important steps that needs to be taken to address the technical challenges. Now, going ahead with the commercial challenges, I'll request my colleague Sambit to take up.
Thanks, Subhrajit. So, thanks, Subhrajit and Jeevan. So it has been really we have covered in the last few minutes of the presentation. We have covered a number of challenges with respect to SAARC implementation, SAARC framework agreement. So we have already covered the technical challenges, which is a very key consideration for moving ahead with the implementation of this regional framework. So we now move ahead to commercial challenges, which again is a key pillar for the SAARC, for the implementation of the SAARC framework agreement. Next slide, please. Yeah. So regarding the corresponding articles of the framework agreement, so we start off with the Article 3, which states that member states may enable buying and selling entities to negotiate the terms, conditions, payment security mechanism, and tenure of electricity trade under the government regulatory mechanisms. So this is very one of the points that that comes across very clearly is that there needs to be a number of buying and selling entities, which would include both public and private entities. Considering the current status, of course, as you know, bilateral trade has been happening between India, Bhutan, India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and of course, also power trade is expected to start between Afghanistan and Pakistan through the implementation of CASA power trade. But the key point to harp on is there have been a few buyers and few sellers, and mostly are through bilateral mechanisms. So the one of the key steps that needs to be taken is to gradually move from bilateral to multilateral power trade, or from private or from public power trading to public private, and finally to private power trading as well. And this is critical, in fact, to expand the power trade, as my colleague Subrajit has mentioned. So power trade has already tripled in the last 3 years, sorry, in the last decade. However, still only 30% of the power traded continues to be through commercial mode, whereas 70% of the power trade continues to be under bilateral power trade agreements. Of course, a slow start has been made, but it is critical to move forward towards more commercial power trade in the future. So this will actually enable in efficient price discovery, because bilateral agreements are particularly on the tariff and other commercial fronts are basically negotiated between the two parties, whereas moving ahead to a commercial mechanism, for example, India Bangladesh currently for the second HVDC interconnection, 500 megawatt of power was actually bidded by BPDB, and two Indian players were shortlisted. So that was through an entirely competitive price discovery mechanism. So this basically brought down the power purchase cost for Bangladesh. In fact, it was almost lower. It was almost 20% lower than the initial agreements that were signed to the G2G mode. So in other ways, this promotes competition, promotes efficient discovery of price mechanism, etc. So as far as the other article is considered, transmission service agreement, again the key to because power prices includes so any buying entity would need to take into account the generation cost plus the transmission cost. So as a transmission service agreement particularly is the agreement to use the transmission corridor. So currently, for most of the bilateral, and even other agreements, as my colleague Subrajit has said, it continues to be on a bilateral mode that is agreed between the parties, and many a times there have been dedicated transmission lines built for power trade. But this may not be a very efficient mechanism. In fact, and also private parties, for example, as we're talking about more about trilateral trade between Nepal and Bangladesh, where one private party is especially is developing the project and intends to sell power to Bangladesh. A commercial transmission service agreement becomes very critical. Of course, as we understand that different countries are under different maturity levels as far as the transmission charges, etc. are considered, because some of the countries like Nepal have bundled transmission charges. Some of the countries like Bhutan has already a separate wheeling charge, whereas many of the countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh do not have a separate transmission charge. So this is one key consideration also, which also needs to be arrived to transmission service agreement, transmission pricing, and of course for the development of transmission transit pricing framework. So that is one other point, because considering the South Asian region, there would be, for example, any trilateral or multilateral trade between two countries might pass through one common geography. So a transit pricing framework becomes critical in addition to the normal transmission pricing framework, and there also national laws also needs to be taken into consideration, as well as the relevant cross-border laws needs to be taken into consideration. So next slide, please. As we highlighted the critical commercial challenges, let me just summarize once again. First is lack of a uniform transmission pricing framework, lack of commercial price discovery, and lack of transit fee arrangements. So these are the three bucketed challenges which we discussed in the last slide. And to address that competitive pricing discovery, as you said, there has been a gradual transition from G2G bilateral agreements to a competitive mode of power procurement, which is currently being realized between India, Bangladesh, and India, Nepal. However, moving ahead, in fact, it needs to go beyond bilateral, and of course, commercial mechanisms needs to be invoked for trilateral and multilateral power trade. Of course, power exchanges could provide a platform for such competitive price discovery, and in fact, power exchanges have been based on international experiences elsewhere, like South African power pool, and the case of Europe also. So they have started off the efficient price, competitive price discovery through power exchanges. So South Asian region, SAARC region also needs to have a gradual transition to trilateral and subsequently to power exchange mode. But as also discussed, that there needs to be various steps that needs to be taken before that we move ahead. But for the time being, in the gradual transformation roadmap, a move to more commercial driven arrangements would be beneficial. In that case, we would like also to highlight one of the projects, which is the Kholongchu project, which is a JV project between India and Bangladesh, India and Bhutan, currently being developed in Bhutan. So as per the JV agreement, the power purchase would be sold through a mix of long-term and short-term, long-term 70% and short-term 30%. And this power is currently being proposed to be the power procurement, power offtake for this power offtake strategy for this project is based to be on commercial principles. So such gradual transition would definitely help in overall market development. Common norms for transmission pricing and other commercial terms, as we said, transmission pricing is very critical, but different countries are under different stages of maturity. For example, in some countries, transmission charges continue to be bundled in the case of bundled utilities, whereas some countries like India have taken a move ahead. There is a fair, the transmission charges consisting of various components have been clearly defined. And in fact, we're very robust. In fact, India has a very robust POC transmission framework, which is mostly in line with the advanced countries globally. So, based on that, gradual movement is necessary. For example, for the countries where unbundling, where the utilities have not been unbundled, rather the first step could be to have a uniform transmission pricing within the country. And then, of course, as the region has certain framework, then gradually introduce concept of location specific pricing, which is a little bit advanced in nature. And on the transit fee mechanism, we only have one agreement that corresponds to the CASA, where a transit fee mechanism for the CASA has been agreed between Afghanistan and Pakistan. However, that continues again to be bilaterally driven. There are various transit fee arrangements which are invoked in multiple countries across the globe. So depending, to start off with, it could be a cost plus basis. So where the corresponding losses within the geography, the cost of construction, and a reasonable return could be provided to the intervening country. However, and then gradually move forward to other complex and location-based pricing models. So as my colleague Subrajit said, ADB has been supporting GMS in various initiatives, and one of the initiative, of course, is on the transmission pricing methodology. So these countries have fairly advanced in that case, that most of the countries there use the postage stamp method. So mostly currently the transactions are happening through such methodology. However, they intend to move ahead with some other variants of the postal stamp method, using differentiation of charge by time of the year to reflect hydrological conditions, since most of the power trade corresponds to hydro, and particularly hydro rich countries like Laos. So it is very different. It is very critical to understand that hydropower is seasonal in nature, and hence this sort of differentiation of charges is being envisaged. Corresponding differentiation of charges by capacity and energy, it corresponds to the two-part tariff, which is also prevalent in South Asian nations, in India particularly, and to a certain extent in Bangladesh. Introduction of charges to generators and consumers. So as far as wheeling tariff is considered, it again continues to be as per the bilateral agreements, and cost plus model is used, but as they are in an advanced stages of discussion and various studies are being undertaken, so it is being evidenced that GMS reason is expected to come soon, or to have a harmonized transmission pricing and transit pricing methodology in the near future. So this could be a very important case study for our region as well, where already trade is taking place, and there are certain transmission pricing methodologies which have been used in other countries. So South Asian region can move ahead with some of these. A concentrated effort is also required because this actually takes a lot of time for the evolution. However, South Asian countries have already taken a step ahead, and the next step ahead could be taken further based on discussions. So next slide, please. Yeah, system operation challenges. Next slide again. So this has been primarily refers to various technical challenges which were also covered by Subhrajit earlier. This is only with respect to one particular aspects. Of course, as we understand that system operation would be a very critical determinant of the cross-border power trade as it gradually increases. Currently it is being handled on a bilateral basis. But as and when the system gets complex, there are multiple transmission infrastructure is built between the member nations. A power trade takes place at different tariffs, different seasonalities, etc. So this becomes very critical. So one of the key determinant for an efficient system operation is, of course, an independent ISO in each of the member countries. So currently India has an independent system operator. Bhutan has also an independent, but other countries like Bhutan, Bangladesh, etc. have system operations, but that is primarily under the transmission company. So that also hinders independence, because transmission continues to be under the domain of state in each of the countries. So this actually hinders the development of private participation, because private generators, or in fact private consumers, would possibly see a bias in this. Hence, hence one of the key determinants to move ahead would be, of course, particularly for an independent system operator in each of the countries, as well as an independent regulator, which is also critical. So most of the countries in the region have an independent regulator, and hence this step is already achieved. So the next step could be to move towards independent system operation. So as we have already discussed mostly about current status, so energy accounting and settlement is one point where we wanted to highlight. For example, actual energy data is used for billing of variable charges in most of the countries, whereas India, it is the scheduled energy, as India is under an APT framework. Again, congestion management becomes very critical when open access is also introduced. And the power trade increases significantly. So this is currently managed generally by load control in most of the countries, and there is no provision specifically for handling congestion management. So so this again becomes very critical, and as we have already highlighted, so lack of common procedure in energy accounting and settlement. So where how the settlement will happen. For example, most of the trades between India and Bhutan, let's say for the bilateral projects, that as far as the deviation charges are considered, so that is currently being handled by Indian power traders. Whereas for few of the transactions between India and Nepal, so there are actually designated agencies for India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, and India, Bangladesh. They're the power traders who handle it on behalf of the member nations. But however, a common procedure, development of a common procedure is quite critical. So next slide, please. Formulation, so scheduling and dispatch, it again comes from a common grid code to standardize operation and scheduling with predefined timelines. For example, day ahead scheduling, 15 minutes scheduling, as has been used in India, is currently mostly being used for India, Bhutan, India, Bangladesh, and India, Nepal power trade. So, however, there needs to be a common grid code to handle the regional power trade when it extends beyond these 4 countries. Energy accounting, we have already discussed. A separate commercial mechanism for imbalance settlement needs to be established, and congestion management. So, of course, generally based on international best practices, users causing congestion pay penalty, and users relieving congestion receive incentive. So, guidelines and regulations regarding this needs to be developed for the SAARC region. Coming to where it has been effectively already been developed, the South African power pool. So it is South African power pool was also set up during the late 90s through a framework agreement, and it has actually progressed to a multilateral power trading within a short period of time. So so the transition from bilateral trade to multilateral trade has happened in a very rapid in a short time frame, including various products like day ahead, term ahead. All the products are available in South African power pool. So as far as the operating guidelines are considered, it was issued by SAPP in 2012. In fact, in the institutional structure, there was a separate operations subcommittee formed which helped develop these guidelines. And in fact, in areas such as system control, system security, emergency protocol, operating personnel, operating planning, all the necessary operating guidelines have been issued. And this, in fact, led to development of all the operational procedure which has been followed, which is getting followed, and which has in fact led to a multifold increase in power trade in the SAPP region. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, on the institutional challenges, the SAARC framework agreement, but this particularly refers to the series of institutions which are responsible for the implementation of the SAARC framework agreement. Under the SAARC structure, which basically include a 7-layered organization structure. So at the top is the SAARC summit and Council of Ministers. Third layer is the Standing Committee of Foreign Secretaries, and the below 4 layer and the last 4 layers are responsible for implementation and day-to-day monitoring. In addition to that, there have been various forums and knowledge institutions formed for smooth implementation of SAARC framework agreement. One of them could be CIRI. Of course, SCC is also supporting SAARC. Then there are other institutions like SAFER, etc., formed to take this ahead. However, one key consideration could be the multiple layer operation and governance system, which actually prolongs the decision making process. Since this is a 7-layered organization, so decision making actually has to go through these layers, from the operational layer to the standing secretary layer to finally the SAARC summit layer, which actually delays decision making. Secondly, as we'll see based on other case studies, in fact, other areas which have progressed well. So nodal points or nodal focused points from each of the member nations needs to be identified. Who would be particularly responsible for coordination on various issues, and who would be actually who would be responsible for the operational issues as well as strategy level issues. So nodal focal points is currently missing in the SAARC institutional structure. And on the third part is, of course, regional focused institutions. As my colleagues earlier said, regional regulatory institution or regional, of course, we have many such forums which are dedicated on a regional basis. However, any legal standing regional institution is yet to be established who can in fact take forward. So development of such regional institution is quite critical for the next phase of power trade group. So next slide. So actually we can skip the next slide. Yes, we can skip this. Yeah, next slide, please. Just a prior one. You can go back once. Yeah. So again, we wanted to highlight one of the experiences in Central Asia, which is again led by ADB. Pakistan and Afghanistan, along with other Central Asian members, form the CAREC forum. So this has a very compact three-layer institutional framework with ministry at the top, minister level, then senior officials meeting, where national focal points have been identified, and of course sector specific working groups again. So this is a very three-layered compact structure, and so ministerial conference. So every year there are one or two ministerial meetings along with senior officials and sector coordination committee. So basically, to draw upon the experience, a compact and thin layer of decision structure will actually help. Of course, on the SAARC form, the SAARC framework agreement has SAARC institutional structure has already been finalized. However, an introduction of national focal points would actually help in quicker decision making in many of the cases. Second point which we wanted to highlight, that structured institutional mechanisms, committees, forums, particularly on the regulatory planning authorities, etc. So there are, of course, joint working groups, etc., operating between various SAARC member nations like India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, India, Bangladesh, and India, Sri Lanka. But this actually needs to be driven on a multilateral basis. So on the operational level as well as on the secretary level. So this institutional adjustments could help achieve speeder progress on many of these initiatives. So next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Last but not the least, if each of these initiative, or each of the challenges which you have discussed leads to the final objective of the development of a regional power market, and regional power market actually in many cases starts with a development of a regional exchange. This has already been discussed that currently bilateral power trade exists between multiple member nations, and there is gradual transition to trilateral trade with a couple of transactions already in the initial stage. For example, 900 megawatt Upper Karnali HPP. This is proposed to be developed in Nepal with power sale to both India and Bangladesh. The 1125 megawatt Dorjilung project is expected to be developed in Bhutan with possible ownership from India, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, and power sale to both India and Bangladesh. However, both these are under the Dorjilung project DPR has already been approved. However, the project structuring and other details are yet to be finalized. We also draw your highlight to Bangladesh PSMP 2016, which in fact they proposed to import more than 500 gigawatt of hydropower from various countries like Bhutan, Nepal, and Myanmar. So the strategy and the intent is very clear. there is a gradual movement from bilateral two-country trade to emerging trilateral trade. Next slide, please. So as you see, the current status and the potential status. So currently we are in phase 2. We are moving towards, currently we are in phase 1. We are moving towards phase 2. However, phase 3 and phase 4, final movement to phase 4 is what we intend to achieve. So phase 3 could be the development of sub-regional power market, where actually post trilateral market is sub-regional grids could be developed. For example, DBIN as a forum has been actively debating on the development of a BBIN sub-regional framework. So to start off with, separate sub-regions could be formed, and then finally move to a harmonized regional power market. So of course this has happened in various countries across the globe. So first, sub-region development is what was also envisaged, formed in South African Power Pool and the CAREC as well. So this could be a gradual movement, but the target is of course the phase 4. Next slide, please. Yeah. So on the key challenges, of course, lack of a clear roadmap for governing the transition from bilateral to trilateral / multilateral. So that is taking place in an ad hoc basis. So of course, currently the Indian government recently published a CBET guideline in 2018 and the corresponding CBET regulations in 2019. Which actually promotes power trading through multiple means. So two of the key insights are with regards to a leeway for a trilateral trade subject to the agreements between the 3 nations. And of course, this also opens up the power exchanges to other member nations in all sort of products such as day-ahead market, term-ahead market, and subject to necessary approvals from the designated authority. So this actually lays a roadmap or is the initial founding stone for using the Indian power exchange for the other member nations to trade the power. So Indian power exchange, as you said, India has two power exchanges and both are highly liquid. There's a very efficient price discovery, and this could in fact already with regards to this, Indian Nepal Electricity Authority has tied up with one of the power traders in India to start selling power in the Indian exchanges. This is subject to necessary approvals. So there is a gradual movement happening in that stage. So again, lack of strategy for the progress of regional power exchange. So of course, this has happened based on the recent Indian guidelines, but we also need to have a strategy whether to have a separate regional power exchange or whether to use or leverage the exchanges already present. So leveraging the exchanges present would help in a quicker implementation, since the technology backbone, the infrastructure, the other necessary facilitating regulations have already been established. However, since most of the South Asian nations do not, in fact, other than India, any South Asian member nation does not have a power exchange, so this could be a short-term roadmap. However, this needs to be evaluated by all the member nations. Of course, and the third point, lack of open access regulation. So for moving ahead to a power exchange, there are a number of regulations on all the fronts we earlier discussed, which are critical. For example, there needs to be regulatory harmonization. Power trading needs to be accounted as a separate activity. Open access there needs to be open access. There needs to be particular transmission pricing as well as transit price framework. So all those detailed operational regulational guidelines needs to be there before we move ahead to trading power multilaterally through power exchanges. So we already have discussed most of the points. So in the light of time, let's move ahead to the next slide. So I also touched upon both these points. For example, considering the current stage, there can be two particular approaches which would take us towards trading in the power exchanges. One is extend operations of established power exchange in India, as this saves a lot of time. The infrastructure, etc., already is there. So to operationalize that, we need to have separate bid areas for each SAARC member nations, where member nations can actually bid depending on the technical feasibility. And this can be started off with BBI nations because they already have established connectivity. So as other nations such as Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, etc., have connectivity with India, so this could be extended naturally to those connecting nations. Second is set up a regional power exchange, and this needs to be debated by the member nations. So once they decide to go ahead with the formation of a regional power exchanges, so this can be again linked to the liquid Indian power exchange. So these are the two broad frameworks under which this could be developed. Of course, the first one provides a quick solution, but then this needs to be debated and discussed, and both have merits and demerits associated with that. As I have already pointed out, these initiatives, MOP guidelines on CBET 2018-19 cross-border trade electricity regulation. So this actually provides a way ahead for trading in the Indian power exchanges. So this could actually lays down or is a stepping stone for moving ahead to multilateral power trade. So next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So in short, to summarize, as we already have discussed, so have bucketed the areas of challenges and how to move forward. So this could be the key areas. So transitioning from bilateral to trilateral and conclusively to multilateral CBET, this is happening. So steps are being taken, and with the necessary cooperation of the member nations in resolving the technical, operational, commercial, and regulatory challenges, this could be the next stage of development. So deepening CBET leads to clean energy transition, as was already earlier discussed by my colleague. So most of the South Asian nations, and in fact the energy hungry nations like India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan continue to be heavily dependent on fossil fuels. However, they have aggressive renewable energy targets. So aggressive renewable energy targets, which actually lead to a decarbonization of the energy scenario. And however, to support this renewable energy, balancing support would be required from various sources, and hydro currently is the cheapest and in fact the most sustainable readily available technology available. So leveraging that, particularly from various hydro-rich nations like Bhutan, Nepal, etc., could be a way ahead. Focus on power market development. So there is a regional power market development happening. However, they are in different stages. So some of the countries still continues to have unbundled utilities. Some countries such as India have moved ahead and the entire GTDs unbundled. And in addition, various new products are currently being Indian market is also undergoing through a transition with movement from long-term bilateral PPAs to more of exchange-based trade. So and also development on the ancillary services and new market mechanisms like RTM, etc. So this also needs to be gradually taken up by the South Asian member nations. De-risking CBET infrastructure projects, enhancing bankability of projects. So my colleague already discussed earlier that any infrastructure project which encompasses two or more nations is subject to various risks like political, economic, as well as legal risks, because and in fact when it considers private developers, because they would be worried in case anything goes wrong, in case in the absence of a proper regulatory and investment framework, this actually increases the investment cost. So this is one consideration that needs to be handled. And last but not the least, so policy and along with policy and regulatory harmonization, necessary institutional capacity needs to be strengthened of the existing institutions, as well as necessary modifications in the institutions and formation of regulatory formation of institutions at the regional level needs to be taken care of. At this we end our presentation. We're happy to receive questions on each of the topic. So thanks Ahmed, and thanks all the
thank you, Mr. Sambit, and thank you, Mr. Jeevan and Mr. Subrajit, for your excellent presentation. We'll now take a few questions from the audience. I would like to request Mr. Subrajit and Mr. Jeevan to also join us, if possible. So the first question is from Pakistan. The question is how ADB can assist or facilitate Pakistan to ratify the framework agreement or to settle any issue if there is. So Mr. Jeevan, can you please respond?
No, thank you for your question. See, it is up to the government to follow their own process of ratification, and of course there are, in every country they have the different process of ratification. It has to go through multiple tiers and scrutiny, review, and so on. And then we have to respect that process as well. But in that effort, if the government has any specific questions, or if they need any clarifications or anything, then of course they can reach out to us, and we'll be happy to provide whatever support that is within our control as well. But we have to go through the government process. We have to wait for that one, and hope that government of Pakistan would take that decision quickly, and then yes, and then give us the share with us their ratification, so that we can move forward. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Matthew. He's working for UNISCAP. He's asking, is there any data available on the level of power flows over time by country or border? So I think Mr. Subrajit or Mr. Sambit, if you can reply to this question.
Data is available on an annual basis for the last 8 years or so between India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, and India, Bangladesh. So necessary data is available. But I think in case he's referring to on a daily basis or monthly basis, those data would also be available with the system operators.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I would like Mr. Jeevan to respond, and then maybe Mr. Sambit and Subrajit can also add to it. The question is, with ADB's working experience for GMS countries, will it be possible to implement similar strategy in South Asian countries for CBET, for cross-border electricity trade?
Yeah, so every region is different, so then it's always very, very difficult and challenging, and my advice is that we should never try to copy what has worked in another country or another region to another place. So for example, GMS has also gone there for a very, very long time, and they have made some good progress as well, but they also went through a very difficult time as well, and not everything has been resolved there. And then the kind of countries, the members they have there, their situation is very different than what is in South Asia. Similarly, CAREC has also made some good progress, but also they do have some challenges there as well. So what we try to do, and in fact that should be our objective, is to look at their experiences and then learn from there, and then try to adapt to our
Hello, sir. We can't hear you. Can you please repeat? Hello, sir.
Whatever is happening in South Asia, we also bring that to GMS, GMS, and also to CAREG as well. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Subrajit, Mr. Sambit, if you would like to add to it, then maybe please go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, we totally agree with Mr. Acharya. So every region has the specific salient features, and what we can do at best is to learn from different regions, and that is, of course, that is something that is being done. So whatever, why only GMS? Whatever has happened in Africa in terms of development of the power pools in Europe or in PJM. So some of the learnings needs to be taken from all of these regions, and whatever can be replicated in the South Asian context, that of course needs to be done. But total replica of another region is probably something that is not recommended because of the reasons Jeevan mentioned.
From Nepal, actually, he's asking, for small countries like Bhutan and Nepal, is it desirable to create ISOs? Wouldn't the transaction cost be high for these small systems? So, Mr. Sambit or
Yeah, yes. So of course, we appreciate that the transaction cost could be higher. However, we also believe that since, for example, let's take the case of Nepal. There are Nepal generation is dominated by private sector along with NEA. So in fact, in the case particularly when private power trade takes when these private parties want to sell power to a neighboring nation, and when there are multiple players, for example, there are private players on one side, NEA on one side, and there are buyers on the other side. So, and the transmission capacity is limited. There often exists a risk that, in fact, NEA could be favored by the system operator, with both system operation and NEA under the government. So there is a natural inclination for a private player to think in this manner. So this is why, and particularly an independent system operator, not only a system operator but an independent system operator as an independent agency is recommended. In fact, as the attendee pointed out, for small countries like Nepal and Bhutan, we would also like to cite the case of Bhutan. In fact, Bhutan has been under ADB's assistance. Bhutan has been exploring segregation of the system operator. Currently, the system operator rests with the T&D agency. So Bhutan has, and in fact, the law says that the system operator should be independent. And Bhutan has ADB has been actively supporting Bhutan in the segregation of ESO. So this is where, and in fact, Bhutan with very low private participation as compared to Nepal is taking up this step. So we believe that the segregation of the system operation and an independent system operator is critical. As far as the transaction costs are considered, so system operation is generally it's generally not for profit business in many of the countries. So the cost, etc., could be recovered from the other participating entities, and this should be nominal in that case. But for cross-border power trade, for ensuring the independence, this would be a very important step. So we need to balance both these and take a decision on the segregation of ESO.
Thank you, Mr. Sambit. The last question for this session is from Nepal again. In ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, member states are striving to are financially burdened, so thereby leaving limited investment for development in infrastructure for the cross-border projects. In this scenario, how member states can come up with a strategy for mobilization of funds for cross-border infrastructure projects? So if you can all contribute to it, that will be great. Thank you.
In fact, we were just to take note of this point, we were just talking to, we are in discussion with the MD of DGPC, the largest hydropower utility in Bhutan, the state-owned hydropower utility in Bhutan. And they say that everything has been impacted by COVID, but power trade continues. And in fact, that has been bringing revenues for Bhutan. So under this context, just to bring about the context that this is only the power trade or the previous investments that Bhutan and India have done, which is actually reaping benefits for Bhutan at this stage, and this continues unabated with totally not impacted by the COVID crisis. Against this backdrop, however, raising investment is a challenge, but this is where we would also request Mr. Jeevan Acharya to speak about ADB's initiatives. Of course, multilaterals like ADB, World Bank, and others have always taken a progressive stance for development of critical infrastructure projects, which not only improves the energy scenario in the region, but also contributes to socio-economic development and also brings in additional revenue for the member nation. So I would request Mr. Jeevan to also talk about ADB's initiatives in the light of this COVID crisis, how ADB is taking ahead various financing modalities. In fact, very recently they have also updated the operationalized plan, and they have taken up various initiatives, various discussions with member nations. So I would now request Jeevan to brief particularly on the financing aspect and how ADB looks at financing in a post-COVID world.
Sir, you are muted. Can you please unmute?
Okay, so I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. What I was mentioning is that we all are affected, not only the countries, but also development institutions like us are also impacted by this. So what we are doing in ADB is that we have also reprogrammed our resources to assist our countries to address this challenge, unprecedented challenge of COVID. So that's why you can see that in all of our countries, a substantial amount of financing has been made available by ADB and also World Bank and other development banks also to meet their urgent need. It is very true what you said is that leaves a very limited resources for other development work. And then if you look at the countries, they are also prioritizing now, paying for the salary of the government staff, doing the very basic operation of the country, and also prioritizing health and also social, education and so on, which are very, very critical. So those are being prioritized right now. So when it comes to energy, it is in fact getting a lesser of attention from these countries on this one. But at the same time, energy being so critical and a very essential service to maintain education, health, and also productivity, and so on. So we are also finding ways to support these countries as well. And of course, there's always be a reprioritization of where the resources would go. But my firm belief is that whatever resources that we have, if we use that properly, I think we'll be able to still finance these activities in the near term. And from ADB side, we are very committed to provide that support, and also I think the country themselves and plus other development partners are doing it. So I think we should be all work together, and then we'll get over of this COVID pandemic as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all again for you taking your time out today for joining us for this session. I think we all learned today from your wonderful presentation, and I hope that we can collaborate in future as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The audience, We'll now be welcoming Mr. Rajiv Ratna Panda from SAARC EI. Mr. Rajiv Ratna Panda will be presenting on deepening power system integration in cross-border electricity trade in SAARC region, its current status and future outlook. Mr. Rajiv is an energy expert, electrical engineer, management, research policy, public policy and strategy professional with multi-regional energy system expertise. He currently works as head technical USAID's South Asia Regional Initiative for Energy Integration at Integrated Research and Action for Development. He provides technical inputs and advice as well as the policy, regulatory, legal market inputs advice for enhancing cross-border electricity trade, power system integration, transmission system and grid integration, regional power market design and development, and energy security in South Asia and BIMSTEC region. He has rich and diverse experience in regulatory harmonization, grid code, open access, trading license, region investment policy, energy modeling, renewable energy grid integration, energy storage technologies, clean renewable energy transition, and energy market development. He was instrumental in developing regional regulatory guidelines for cross-border electricity trade, conceptualizing the development of regional regulatory technical institutional mechanism for deepening energy cooperation and energy trade, energy sector policy development in South Asia and BIMSTEC region. Welcome, Mr. Rajiv. Thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours. Please begin your presentation.
Thank you, Ahmad, and hello to everyone. Is my screen is visible, Ahmad? Hello.
Yes, your screen is visible and you're audible. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So, hello everyone. Thank you, Ahmad, for inviting to speak on the subject. SAARC has been, as many of us know, that has been working in this particular area for quite some time, since the year 2000. And we have seen over the years how things has improved. Sometimes one step forward, and sometimes you've also seen the different challenges that we have faced. Already the presentation by PwC and ADB has covered many of the points related to challenges and the various requirements for the cross-border power trade. What I will be doing in the sense that since the conference is about how we can have the roadmap and action plans, so I would just like to explain a few outlooks, and then that can be factored in while we think about the action plan for implementing SAARC framework agreement on energy cooperation. I will be covering these topics. What are the overall macroeconomic growth scenarios? Very briefly, the overview of South Asian power sector, then current and future scenario of cross-border electricity trade, then future outlooks, where I will cover 4 outlooks. Then what are the enablers for actually accelerating CBET and developing regional power market, and what are some of the initiatives that we have undertaken, which kind of provides the actionability to the articles of the SAARC framework agreement, and then roadmap and action plans. On the macroeconomic growth, the region has been one of the fastest growing region in the world, and of course it whole roughly 23% world population lives in this region itself. And if we take the region as one of the economy, it could be fifth largest economy in the world. And even after the COVID impact also, from many other regions, if you compare, the region will still going to remain one of the fastest growing region in the world. In fact, it will still register a positive growth rate as per the IMF's World Economic Outlook April 2020. So the growth aspect is still there, and it is going to remain even after the COVID-19. And these are the macroeconomic factor also drives the overall energy sector development. So that's why it's important to know the overall macroeconomic scenario in the region. However, we all know that the region is a very least integrated region in terms of trade, and the intra-regional trade is very low, something around 5.6%, whereas many other regions around the globe has quite significant, inter-regional trade share. And why I'm making this point, because we should keep this in mind, that this basically tells you how closely this region is integrated in the region, in the sense as compared to other region, and it has also has an impact on the overall energy cooperation and energy integration subject that we will discuss, so to speak. This also has a bearing on the overall energy policies aspects in the region. Very briefly on the Southeastern power sector, PDOC already covered some of these points. There is a lot of diversity in terms of the resources. We have Bhutan, Nepal, Nepal more hydro dominated, and there are others which are fossil fuel dominated. The power capacity addition has been increasing significantly over the years. Something like 190 gigawatts in the year 2010, it has increased to roughly 443 gigawatts by 2020. And the major factor is that despite the role of Bhutan and Nepal, the fossil fuel dominates the entire power sector in the region, and coal itself will be around 48% of the total installed capacity, and natural gas could be around 11%. So it is still a fossil fuel dominated power system in the Southeastern region, and there is a lot of diversity, resource diversities between the countries. It also makes the case for cross-border power trade. Despite this capacity additions in last 10 years, so to speak, the electricity consumption per capita continues to remain probably one of the lowest, and though it has increased in recent years. And if we look at the sustainability rankings of different countries, still a lot of significant challenges remain in most of the countries, and affordable and clean energy continues to remain a challenge in this particular region. On the cross-border status and outlook, this is again touched. The trade has increased despite one would wish that many of these things would be in place, but despite the fact that even if this many ingredients are not in place, the trade is continuously increasing over the years, and the trade has almost more than doubled since the year 2012. And if we look at the future, we see that a lot of transmission planning are happening between the region, and it is expected that something around 43.8 gigawatt of cross-border interconnection can happen by 2036 or 2040. So a lot of positive aspects in terms of accelerating the cross-border trade is expected to happen going in future. What are some of the future outlooks? To me, there are 4 key outlooks that I thought I will emphasize on. First would be the transitioning from bilateral to trilateral. Second will be on the renewable energy-based CBET, not just the traditional CBET, but renewable energy-based CBET. Then outlook 3 will be on the commercial form of the CBET, and then outlook 4 will be on the power market development and most of the market integration that may happen between the countries. And we'll go one by one of this outlook. On the transition to bilateral or trilateral, it's kind of a, this is the kind of evolution that you see many part of the global. So initially you have bilateral contracts between 2 countries, and then slowly you move towards a trilateral or quadrilateral form of connection between the region. So some sort of trilateral contracts or quadrilateral contracts happen inside the region, and this leads to the development of sub-regional markets. One could be BBIA or that kind of sub-regional market. And then eventually this sub-regional market gets integrated and becomes a common or unified market. And the South Asia also kind of moving in similar direction. Probably we are moving from the bilateral connections to the trilateral board of connections, and hopefully that is the next step that we are looking at. We know that Bangladesh has a lot of plans to import from Bhutan and Nepal, and recently the price negotiation has been concluded between Bangladesh and the GMR project in Nepal, where they plan to import around 500 megawatt of electricity to Bangladesh, from Nepal to Bangladesh. Of course, the transmission and other aspects are also still under discussion, so to speak. So that's not yet finalized, but at least the price negotiation has been concluded. Of course, there are other projects like Darjeeling and the Namari projects. They are also under a different stage of development, and the region will slowly move a transition from bioelectric to mode of power. The second point, I will focus on the renewable energy based stability. We all know that the most of the South Asian countries face severe environmental climate change challenges, and in most of the countries, the power sector is a major contributor to the CO2 emissions in South Asian countries. And South Asia remains vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. Therefore, decarbonization of the power sector is one of the fundamental, challenges, I should say. And in fact, after even COVID-19, there has been a lot of thoughts on the sustainability and so on and so forth. So I think the decarbonization will continue to remain a major factor going in future. And in this context, fortunately, the region is endowed with quite a lot of, renewable energy potential, not just hydro potential, but also solar and wind potential. And the region has 350 gigawatt of hydro potential, and roughly, not much has been developed, in the sense that only 18% has been developed so far. Even in terms of the solar and wind potential, large amount of solar and wind potential available inside the region, and in fact, if the region wants to go for energy sustainability, you can inside the region itself there are enough resources to tap, and through cross-border energy trade or electricity trade, these resources can be developed, and which will lead to the clean energy transition and sustainability, and also enhancing energy security in the region, because you will be less dependent on the energy from the outside of the region, so to speak, which has its own macroeconomic impact, so to speak. Recently some study was conducted by NREL, and it shows that if Bangladesh imports let's say 1 gigawatt of hydropower, 1 gigawatt of wind power, and 1 gigawatt of solar power from state of Tamil Nadu, let's say in Indian state Tamil Nadu, then just importing 1 gigawatt of wind power from Tamil Nadu, it could see that its annual production cost can reduce by 9.5%, which is very significant. And similarly, the annual emission can also go down by 5.5%. And similarly, if it imports 1 gigawatt of solar power from Tamil Nadu, you could see that production cost can go down by 3.9%, and so on and so forth. And of course, the net savings can also change accordingly, so to speak. So it basically tells you that there's a lot of scope for renewable energy-based trade, and it also helps to decarbonize the power sector. Similarly, from Sri Lanka point of view, if Sri Lanka plans to import around, again, 1 gigawatt of solar and 1 gigawatt of wind from Tamil Nadu state of India, because Sri Lanka's cost of production is relatively higher, so it could see that this annual production cost can actually go down by 29%, which is very significant if they import 1 gigawatt of wind power from Tamil Nadu. And similarly, if they import 1 gigawatt of solar power from Tamil Nadu, it can also go down by minus 18%, and so on and so forth. We also recently know about this one sun, one world, one grid vision that Government of India has come up with, and it also hopes that large-scale regional and trans-regional cross-border interconnection, not just in South Asia, but beyond South Asia, and so on and so forth. And we have seen that the solar tariff in India has been very competitive over the years. And this also makes the case that even if you go for a large-scale regional interconnection with such a competitive tariff, it actually makes things feasible, and so on and so forth. Of course, it will be done in 3 phases, but just to even think of the first phase itself, a lot of trans-regional integration expected to happen because of such initiatives. On the Outlook 3, on the commercial form of CBET, we know that when power trade started in the region, almost all the power trade was between governments, G2G contracts. So around 2010, everything was G2G based. Now, of course, by 2020, we see that quite a significant amount of trade is happening in some form of commercial mode of power trade, so to speak, which is something around 33%. And slowly, the region is moving towards that form of trade, and it has its own value because it brings commercial approach to the whole cross-border power trade as such, and it also helps in competition and better price discovery, and it also kind of for sure a mindset change in my view, which will help help to transit to the power market, because when you go for a market, you need whole mindset changes in terms of how do you deal with the market and so on and so forth. And it will also help and foster private sector engagement and investment, because government resources are not that they're rather scarce, so to speak, on such large infrastructure projects, so to speak. So that is something that is kind of taking shape, and hopefully it will become a bit more bigger going in future. So that's the kind of outlook that we see in the region. The fourth one is the regional power market development and market integration. SAARC has been working in this area for quite some time and advocating the need for a regional power market. We know that power exchange-based rates are more fair, transparent, and neutral marketplace. It also helps in competitive price discovery, so to speak. We have done various studies on multilateral electricity trade, and also the pilot market exercise called South Asia Regional Power Exchange. And we have found that if you go for a multilateral power trade in BBIN countries, the capex can be reduced by $17 billion due to regional trade. And also in the SAARC study, we found that if different countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, participates in Indian power exchange, the quantum of market clearing volume can be increased in the range of 5 to 7%. So that also tells you that if you go for option one, that is participated on the existing power exchange, that also has a significant contribution to the overall trade volume in the power exchanges. And of course, India is taking a lot of power market initiatives, of course, because the renewable energy has brought a lot of dynamism in the power sector. And these power market initiatives also offers the opportunity to leapfrog on the cross-border front as the market integration takes place in a much more integrated and comprehensive manner going in future. Not just India, but many other South Asian countries are also have plans for renewable energy expansions. Of course, India has 175 gigawatt, and of course, increasing it to 450 gigawatts. Many other countries are also working on to have a larger, RE capacity expansion in the region. And in this context, the role of hydro become very interesting, because it not only can provide the cross-border power trade, but it also can provide optimized grid balancing, and it can also act as a tool for flexibility and managing our intermittency. And it also gives opportunity for developing a regional power market where actually you can create the balancing services and ancillary market and so on and so forth. I just give an example, though it is not directly related to balancing as such, but during this 9 p.m. 9 minutes event, where people switched off the light in solidarity with the COVID-19, the people who are at the front line of the COVID-19 activities, where power demand went down significantly because of everybody switched off the lights in India. And during that particular period, something around 400 megawatt of flexibility was achieved from hydro plants in Bhutan. So it tells you that if you have that kind of interaction and systems in place, one can actually tap into the balancing aspect. Though this example is not exactly related to balancing, but it kind of gives you an indication that some of these things can also happen. In fact, though it's a fact from the European countries, but it just tells you that in 2016, 80% of the Denmark's wind generation was balanced through CBET through the utilization of the Norway's hydro resources. So of course, they are different region and different market setup, but it also gives you indication that if you have large renewable energy, if you design the system in a proper manner, you could have that kind of benefits in a region also. What are some of the enablers for cross-border power trade and market development? Most of these points has been touched along with the current status and what is remaining in, remaining to be done by the ADB and PWC in the presentation. Well, just for the sake of explaining it, I will explain. There could be broadly 4 areas: political, regulatory, technical, and institutional aspects. Of course, at the political level, you need a political vision to get it done. And I would say that it's just not the intergovernmental agreement, but there has to be some implementation mechanisms also. Because intergovernmental agreement is one aspect, but how would you implement some of these agreements? There has to be some sort of implementation mechanism in place so that this agreement can actually translate from the broad agreements to the level of implementations also. On the regulatory side, one could list 10, 15 parameters, but I will just focus on 3-4 areas. First is the permissibility to use the intermediary transmission network for open access, because if you don't have that, then things become difficult. Then there has to be some rules for identification of transmission capabilities and congestions. Some rule has to be found out. And there has to be some rules for measurement of imbalance and settlement. These are some of the very important things that needs to be put in place. On the technical and commercial side, of course, we need to have harmonized some grid code standards, and some sort of transmission pricing and transit charge mechanism has to be found out. There has to be some understanding on that, even if it is not a very full-fledged or fully rational or optimal solution, but some understanding has to be there. Of course, regional grid planning needs to be there, and some form of settlement and payment mechanism. On the institutional side, we need to have institutional arrangement, and the regional coordination forums are desirable. And Sari has been working in this area. I'll come to that in coming slides. And these are some of the things that I think should be in place at the implementation level, not just at the level of intergovernmental agreement, but at the implementation level, so that we can transit to a market development in the region. SAARC has been working in this area for quite some time, and on specific to various articles of the agreement. So we have conducted various studies. Open access, of course, is a very significant area, and we have reviewed all the open access provisions in South Asian countries, and we have suggested a model regional open access framework and guidelines. And it's up to the member state to take the benefit of such studies and try to see what steps they need to do. We also already suggested a country-wise specific action plan as a part of this study. Similarly, on the trading licenses side, we have come up with this model framework on trading licenses agents, and because these are very essential for facilitating the trading. On the grid code planning and system protection side, we have done a very comprehensive study on the harmonization of grid codes, operating standards, and so on and so forth. So even if somebody wants to talk on the planning aspect, there is a very detailed grid code guideline in the form of a planning code, which has been recommended as a part of this study also. So some of these studies already give certain amount of solutions. How do we move forward on different aspects of the implementation of the SAARC framework agreement? I think we just need to think about how some of these things can be implemented, or what are some of the bottlenecks, or what are some of the things additional things that needs to be done in each of the countries, so that some of these things can also get implemented. And both, this study also suggests a regional technical institutional mechanisms like South Asia Forum of Transmission Utilities to actually ensure that the things are not done, in a very structured manner over a period of time, not just necessarily in a very ad hoc manner, so to speak. Similarly, many other areas also we have worked on what are the changes in laws, regulations, and etc. I will focus one study here, which we have conducted for the SAARC Council of Experts of Energy Regulators. This is about model set of electricity regulation for implementation of SAARC framework agreement on energy cooperation. And this study itself suggests very detailed models SAARC electricity regulation for regional power trade, and it also addresses all the regulatory aspects of the cross-border power trade, including suggesting what are the regulatory changes that could be required for implementation of the module regulation. And again, this is another part of the SAARC Council of Energy Regulators activities. So while devising the action plan, maybe some of these already suggested recommendations can also be considered, so that we move and implement some of these aspects in a very holistic manner, so to speak. These are already published studies that I explained, and there are some other studies that also we are already doing, which will also help some of the articles of the SAARC agreement. One is on the coordinated generation and transmission master plan, which may help in Article 7. Then on the model regional framework for trilateral and multilateral power trade, and which will be helpful for the Article 2. And then a South Asia knowledge resource database, which will be also helpful for the Article 5, which talks about data updation and sharing, of information on electric sector on the agri template. So these are some of the activities that's already ongoing. As and when complete, it will probably help to this, broad vision of these articles that has been emphasized in the SAARC agreement. I mentioned about the institutionalization, and even previous speaker also spoke about the institutionalization. We are, very, actively working on developing these 5 institutional mechanisms. One at the level of the regulators, and here, of course, we are already providing technical support to the SAFIR working group as well as the SAARC Council of Export of Energy Regulators. Similarly, on the transmission into the side, we aim to facilitate the process of creation of South Asia Forum of Transmission Utilities, and also at the level of the system operator, that is South Asia Forum of System Operators. And also, we are also working on to create a forum for electricity market, because we feel that maybe not immediately, but maybe within few years, the market transition may happen rather more significantly. So therefore, we're also working on creative forum on the electricity market. On the investment side, also we are working on to create a forum of energy investment. So some of the issues related to investment can be discussed, and because investment have its own different set of requirements, not necessarily from the power sector point of view, but in general about the investment finance point of view. So these are some of the institutional areas that we are very concretely working on, and this will also help overall implementations of the various intergovernmental agreements. On the roadmap and action plan, I will just focus on 10 points. The first point I will focus that the whole approach should shift from the requirement, just saying that these are the requirements that we should have. The focus should be on how to implement some of these articles of the agreement, and accordingly some concrete roadmap and thought process which we evolve, so that some of these already agreed agreements at the trilateral or multilateral level can also start on the implementation part. Then secondly, focusing on the how do we strengthen and facilitate the process of regulatory harmonization. See, one aspect is that we can always say that there should be a common and harmonized regulatory framework, but how do you strengthen and facilitate that process? Because different countries have different stages of evolution, so to speak. So this could be my second point. The third point could be also on focusing on the complementary regulatory framework development. You see, some countries already have a very high level of regulatory, instrument and tools and techniques are in place, but other countries don't have. Let's say, for example, open access. Well, India has certain regulatory setup for the open access, but other countries don't have. So I think the focus should be also on developing complementary regulatory framework in each South Asian countries from the perspective of CBET, so that there is some, complementarity in the regulatory process in each of the countries. Then also transition to regional system planning. Of course, that is quite obvious, because if you go for regional system planning, there will be a much more optimal, much more optimization of the not only the resources but even the power generation and transmission assets. We also need to think on developing tools, instrument and tools for de-risking. Some specific instrument and tools also need to be thought about for de-risking CBET, because CBET projects has its added risk factor as compared to many other normal cross-border power projects. focusing on the power market development, including access market, I think was also already spoken, and that focus will be on that side also. Institutionalizing the process, as I mentioned, that need to build this, institution at a very different level, regulator, system operator, transmission utilities, and investment, so that this process happens on a sustainable manner over a period of time. It is also important to value CBET not just as a trade, but also as a tool and means for clean energy transition and decarbonization. Because I think that aspect also needs to be emphasized, and because there is a value that needs to be appreciated of CBET in South Asian countries, which can actually help in clean energy transition and decarbonization. And strengthening institutional capacity and technical assistance, of course, is always a ongoing process. And the last point I will mention that there should be annual review of the SAARC MOU agreement. So let's say every year there is a review that takes place of the SAARC MOU agreement, and what has been the progress on the implementation of each of the country. An annual status report can be prepared, so that there is a process of reviewing and analyzing it, and then also find what are the areas where some of more more concentrated or more focused approach needs to be undertaken. So that is how probably we can also track and see what are the gaps that is there in terms of implementation, and then try to come up with strategy and action plans. How do you address some of these gaps and so on and so forth. So these are some of the 10 points I just thought to put as a roadmap and action plan for deepening CBET in the SAARC region, and I will be happy to answer or discuss any such point. And I always end with a quote from Nelson Mandela, which says that it always seems impossible until it's done. So when you see something very difficult, it always looks very impossible. But once it is done, it kind of feels that it could have been done, so to speak. So thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rajiv. Thank you for your excellent presentation. As always, you have been very comprehensive about the topic. So we'll now take a few questions. The first question is there any scope for coming up of regional transmission master plan in SAARC region?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned in the maybe last few slides, that under SAARC we are working on to create a regional transmission master plan, and of course we will take into account what has been already planned between the SAARC countries. There are national plans which already plan a lot of cross-border transmission lines, so we'll take into account, and by taking into account some of these existing already planned transmission lines, we plan to have this regional transmission plan as a part of our SAARC initiative. So yes, we have a plan on that.
Thank you. The next question is, given that India is the main hub of electricity trade in SAARC region, how do you see the excess power of hydropower in Nepal, which is expected to be in the magnitude is about 3,000 megawatt in next 2 years? How do you foresee that power can be exchanged with India?
Right. So, okay. So, right. Of course, those who are already the bilateral agreements between the countries, that anyway will be decided as per the bilateral agreements. But what I must say is that when we discuss about the hydropower, as I mentioned in my presentation, we should not just only thinking about the hydropower as such, because hydropower has a balancing value, in the region. And if you think about the renewable energy and etc., it does have a balancing aspect. So what I would suggest is that to enhance the, sellability of hydropower, let's say, if I use that word, sellability, I think we need to think hydropower and also the balancing aspect of that hydropower. And this is the year we can, increase the sellability of the hydropower, because one could argue that, hydropower maybe in initial years, the tariff could be a little bit high and it will become a little bit challenging, which is a fact. But at the same time, if we have this balancing aspect component also put in place, I think it will definitely increase the sellability of the hydropower, and the challenges that one may face during the initial years can also be, I would say, minimized to a large extent. And secondly, also, hydropower being a clean form of energy also has its own added value and component to it. So what I would say that some of the design also need to factor in the cleanness and the balancing aspect of the hydropower when the overall power market designs are being thought of or are being discussed in the region. Yeah.
The next question is, you talked about the lowering solar tariffs in India. So in your opinion, what will be the impact of those lowering solar tariffs on the cross-border electricity trade, given the cost of the electricity is important?
Yeah. So see, one of the if we all believe that the power sector has to be decarbonized in the region, because the power sector significantly contributes as a source to CO2 emissions, I would say that this scale. I mean, India has a large scale, and that scale has brought down the prices to a large extent. I think it will help to move from just, let's say, coal-based electricity to a more of a renewable energy or clean-based electricity. So I would say that it will actually help the cross-border electricity trade to become more greener and cleaner going in future, as we as a region must take into account the fact that the region has to decarbonize its power sector for the benefit of all, and also for bringing the sustainability into the region. You remember I saw a slide on the sustainability, and if you see the slide, most of the countries are not doing that well in sustainability ranking as such. So I think it will help to greening the cross-border electricity trade in the region. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, gradual transition is something we look forward to. However, what about the market mechanism within the trading countries other than India? Is it necessary for these countries to establish their own power market setup to move towards the market mechanism?
Okay, so there are two answers to this question. The first answer, I mean, idealistic answer could be is that if you have a market principle in your country, so the level of optimization will be maximum. So that could be the best way to do it. But it is not a precondition. Suppose you want to trade on a market platform, let's say in India's market platform, it is not necessary that you have to completely reform, because it has its own implications, so to speak. But of course, then you can't expect the level of optimization that you could have expected, provided everything is a market kind of system in place. So, for example, when we did the power exchange exercise, of course, the respective countries were bidding in the power exchange. So there was a single entity who was bidding in the power exchanges. And there also we found a lot of optimization in the power exchange study. So I would say it's not a precondition, but if the country plans for it, let's say they have a 5 to 6 year plan how they can go and move towards the power market, I think that will be ultimately helpful to that country going in future. But to start with, it's not a precondition, I would say.
Okay, thank you for your comprehensive answer. The last question is, currently the cooperation on energy is driven by the diversification of the sources rather than energy crisis, as the SAARC member states are focusing more on cheap solar and other distributed generation. The cross-border electricity trade is lacking from the spirit of the framework agreement. How can this situation be expedited, or how can we formulate a policy that makes sure that at least 10% of the power comes from this cross-border electricity trade in member states?
Okay, so you said that lack in the agreement. Which agreement? Is there any specific agreement you mentioned?
The question is that related to the implementation of the SAARC framework work agreement. Is
Okay.
Mark, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, I mean, the SAARC framework agreement is a broad agreement which tells you, larger principles, so to speak. I can talk about Europe also, they also had certain provisions that every country should have some amount of electricity from the cross-border aspect, just to optimize that. So yes, I think going in future, if member countries can think on those direction, and it can also help to make the cross-border electricity a little bit mainstreaming, so to speak. So maybe some sort of mechanism can also be thought of, but again, it is up to the member state to decide whether they want to have it or not. They can still have it, even if it is not a part of the agreement. They can still have an outlook for that. For example, if you see the Bangladesh power system master plan, it already talks about having import of around 6,000, 7,000 megawatt of power through cross border. So already governments are thinking on that. It may not be a part of the agreement as such, but it's certainly there as a part of countries' developmental priority, their strategies and the policies. So it's already there as a part of the country's plans and strategies. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rajiv, for joining us today. I think we have come to the end of the questions that we received for your session. Thank you for taking a time out again, and hopefully we can collaborate again in future as well on events of mutual interest. Take care and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dear audience, moving on to the final session of this video conference, we have been joined by Mr. Abrar Hussain from Central Power Purchasing Agency, Pakistan. Mr. Abrar Hussain is an electrical engineer who has worked both in private and government sectors of Pakistan and is well versed in legal, regulatory, planning, and technical aspects of both developing and developed countries. He has diversified experience of market development, power sector planning, and power projects. He is leading market development activity in CPPAG and working with MRC International Consultants. He has exposure of both North American pool markets and to European exchange power markets. Under his guidance and being the main designer of the Pakistani competitive market with international consultants, Pakistani market has expected a commercial operation date of March 2022. Welcome, Mr. Abrar. Thank you for joining us today. We can see your screen. You may begin your presentation. Excuse me, Mr. Abrar, you are still muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much. The SAARC Energy.
Sorry to interrupt. We can see. Can you please open the slides in the full screen? We're seeing the presenter view.
You are seeing the presenter view? Okay.
Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yes, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for providing this opportunity to present this market reforms to the audience of the SAARC countries. So first of all, I would talk about the scheme of the presentation. So first we will see some market development history to discuss about how the competitive markets were developed around the globe. And then in Pakistan, then we will talk about some international perspective, that what paths were taken. And then we will go toward the approach that has been designed for Pakistan, that what are the different stages at which the market will be developed. And then we will briefly discuss the competitive market design which is proposed for Pakistan, and then a short explanation regarding the implementation plan. So considering the time limitation, I'll go directly to the slides without giving any brief history. So regarding the power sector reforms, considering that the power sector has been historically considered as a monopoly, and the sector has been developed through vertically integrated utilities until in 1982, when there was a market reforms were introduced first by the Chile, and then followed by the other countries, especially UK, and then the European and the US states. So considering this change, Pakistan also approved the WAPDA strategic plan in 1992, in order to introduce competition in the power sector of Pakistan. So this was the first seed of the competitive market in Pakistan, the WABDA strategic plan of 1992. Then the next major step comes in 1994 when the first power policy was issued by the government of Pakistan, which enabled the private sector participation in the power sector of Pakistan. This policy offered generous incentives and a significant amount of capacity was added to the system through this policy. Then another major shift occurred in 1997 when the sector was debundled as per the plan approved in 1992, and the NEPRA Act was enacted, which established an independent regulator to regulate the debundled entities. And the unbundling took place in 1998. I'm sorry, Talak, can you please help? I'm unable to see my screen.
We are seeing
There
your
are a lot
screen.
of tabs on the right side.
We are seeing your screen. Can you click on the red arrow? That will hide the control panel.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So in 1998, what was envisaged in 1992 was implemented, and the vertically integrated utility WABDA, the Water and Power Development Authority of Pakistan, this was unbundled into three different sections. One was the thermal section of this WABDA was disintegrated into 4 GENCOs. The distribution sector was disintegrated into 8 distribution companies, and now these are further bifurcated and turns out to be 10. And the transmission sector of WABDA was assigned to the National Transmission and Dispatch Company. So this unbundling, and PEPCO was established as a transition company to help these dependent sector to achieve the sustainability. So moving further, in 2002, the NTDC was granted a transmission license by the NEPRA, the regulator of the power sector. In this transmission license, the NTDC was given 4 major functions. One was the transmission network operator to operate the network, expand and plan. And the other function was the function of the system operator to decide the dispatches. Pakistan is based on economic dispatch, so all the generation plants are dispatched by the system operator. So this function was also assigned to NTDC. The third major function was the power purchasing function. As now the sector has been debundled into generation, transmission, and distribution, so now the power purchaser from the generation was also assigned to NTDC. And the fourth function was the contract registrar and power exchange administrator. So as per terms of the license, NTDC was mandated to develop a competitive market in Pakistan, the competitive trading bilateral contract market. This name was mentioned in the license by 2008. However, due to several reasons, this could not happen. So by 2009, the power purchasing function was housed as working as a department of NTDC, the CPPAG. But in 2009, this was incorporated as a legal entity, a separate legal entity, but continued to work as a department of NTDC from 2009 to 2015. The next major development comes in 2013 regarding market development, when Pakistan issued a new power policy, a comprehensive one, which also talked about establishment of competitive wholesale markets. So this further elaborated the goal towards going into competition. In 2015, the Economic Coordination Committee of the federal government, they decided to go into a competitive market. So CPPAG was operationalized functionally in 2015, and ECC mandated it to develop a comprehensive design and plan for this competitive market and facilitate the transition towards this competition. This model to be developed by the CPPAG was supposed to be approved by the regulator. So this was the mandate given by the Economic Coordination Committee of the federal government in 2015. So while taking this mandate from the federal government, CPPAG from 2015 and until 2018 worked on this design with the help of international consultants provided by the Asian Development Bank, and come up with a design which was thoroughly discussed among stakeholders. And then there was special committees and things like that. So the model was finalized until March 2018. And in 2018, the model was submitted to NEPRA for approval. And NEPRA took almost 1.5 years, and the model was approved in December 2019 with the specific directions that the CBPAG now needs to prepare a detailed design and its detailed implementation roadmap, which is also prepared and now submitted to NEPRA, and the approval is expected within this month. So moving forward, when talking specifically when the market transition history started in 2015, so the major was the ECC decision, and then from 2015 until 2018, extensive consultations by the CBPAG, help of the consultants, local capacity building, several seminars, and the model was submitted to NEPRA in March 2018, and the approval came in 2019. The final approval of the detailed design and the implementation roadmap is expected by this month, and the ECC, the first target date was June 2021, but the ECC has extended that after the approval coming from NEPRA. We have 18 months. So if it is approved in the next month, so the COD comes out to be April 2022. So before going into the details of the market design for Pakistan, it's also important to put some international perspective. So on the screen, we have mapped 9 markets, which we have studied in detail. And the main lesson from this international study was that each market design is unique. There is no such solution like if you can copy paste a design from like a country like Turkey or India or some other country and replicate the same in Pakistan. Each market design is unique as per perspective of the local conditions. And there are several design parameters, which I have mentioned, almost 9 parameters on the screen. And you have to take certain choices based on your own peculiarities. So considering this, what are the 2 major types of markets? One, which are based on self-dispatch model, like the European and Turkey model, and the others are the centralized dispatch model, which is mostly implemented in the North America, South America, Philippines. India is a type of hybrid model where the discoms do economic dispatch individually, but on the central pool there is a self-dispatch model. So the main message of this slide is that each market design is unique, and whenever any country wants to implement a market, it has to take into account its own peculiarities and design one for itself while looking at the international perspective. Also, market transition, it's not a simple thing. It's a very big undertaking, and it's all about alignment of the legal, policy, and regulatory framework to give certainty into the market. Considering the perspective of Pakistan, so in Pakistan we have a legal and policy and regulatory framework which needs to be aligned as per the design of the competitive market. And the next is the institutional work. Now the institutions have to work as per the policy and legal policy and regulatory framework, and their capacity must be enhanced, because in a competitive market, the trust of the players on the market and the service provider is very important. On the bottom line, you can see that a market transition is enhancing along this line, that when there is a vertical integrated utility, there is no competition. Then you move towards a single buyer, and then single buyer plus, and then move towards competitive market. So it's a gradual process from moving from a vertical integrated utility towards a competitive market. And also, competition means liberalization. The more you liberalize the market, the more you have competition. Like in a vertically integrated utility, there is no liberalization, you have no competition. And moving towards then a single buyer and a wholesale market, then retail competition, when you have full liberalization, and the degree of the competition will increase as along the trajectory of the path. So now coming towards stages of the market development, that what path has been taken internationally and recommended for Pakistan. What are the different stages of the market development? But before going into that, I'll be using some terminology which needs some clarification here. That what are the different players in a market? So there are two types of players. One are the consumers and the other are the supplier. Consumers who are purchasing the electricity and suppliers who are supplying the electricity. So in the type of consumers, there are two type of consumers. One are called regulated consumers or non-eligible consumers. These are the type of consumers which do not have the choice to change their electricity suppliers. These are supplied through regulated tariffs. The other are called eligible consumers. In Pakistan terms, these are also called the bulk power consumers, which have the choice to change their supplier. Means they can either take from the local utility or they can choose their own supplier. And also on the supplier side, there are two types of supplier. One are called discos as supplier or the regulated suppliers, which supply to all consumers who are willing to take supply from this, and the rates are regulated. This regulated supplier cannot negotiate bilateral rates with the consumers. And the others are called, in our context, the competitive suppliers, who can sell only to eligible consumer based on their bilaterally negotiated rates and prices. So this distinction is very important to keep in mind. So currently, Pakistan is predominantly a single buyer model. In the single buyer model, so all the power generation is contracted by the CPPAG, and then CPPAG is selling to the DISCO, and the DISCOs are selling to end customers. So in the middle between the DISCOs and the power generation is a single buyer, the CPPAG, which is the current market. So I will go into how the single buyer market works. So in the single buyer market, buyer is the central power purchasing agency. How the financial flows work. So on one side there are generators, there is CPPAG, and on the other side there are DISCOs. And NTDC is providing the transmission services. So all invoices are the generator send invoices to CPPAG, and the NTDC also its use of system invoice submit to CPPAG. CPPAG collects all these costs. So CPPAG collects all these costs and then calculate the called capacity transfer rate and energy transfer rate, CTR and ETR, and charge it to the DISCOs. And all the payments are made to CPPAG, and then CPPAG, what payments are received based on that, pays to NTDC and as well as generators. Today, each DISCO has one contract with CPPAG, which is called the Power Purchase Agency Agreements. The PPAs and EPA costs are equally shared among the DISCOs. This is not a case that a specific PPAs are paid by one DISCO and some specific PPAs are paid by the other DISCOs. All PPA and EPA costs are equally shared among the DISCOs, and the costs are allocated on monthly basis. Monthly invoices are collected and allocated among the different DISCOs based on their consumption, based on their share of capacity and energy. And there is same regulated price. Per unit of price for each DISCO is the same. There is no difference on that. And this wholesale cost is transferred to retail electricity tariffs that NEPRA takes into account the CTRs and ETRs, and then calculates the end consumer tariffs. And all DISCOs pay the same per unit transmission charge. sorry, this is it pointer.
Can you maybe you can press escape? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see my
Yes.
slide?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
So now, going towards the first stage from the single buyer market, the first stage is the wholesale to introduce the competition in the wholesale market. So what will be the difference? That all the power generation units, they will be selling towards the wholesale market, and the in the wholesale market there will be discos as last resort supplier. Competitor suppliers will emerge, and there will be traders that will emerge. These all will trade buy electricity, buy and sell electricity in the wholesale market, and the suppliers and the discos as supplier and the competitors as suppliers, they will sell to the end customers. And the second stage for this after this wholesale market is the retail market. So many people argue that why not we start the retail at the same time when the wholesale market commences. But there is a lot to be done when you need to start the retail market, because there are the ICT infrastructure is not ready yet, and there are certain conditions. The global experience shows that in the developing countries, when you start with the wholesale market and then move towards retail company, this is the better approach. If you directly start with the retail markets, the systems are not ready yet, and there are negative consequences of that. So after giving this brief background, now coming to the competitive market design part. So for the CTBCM, the competitive trading bilateral contract market, which is the wholesale market of Pakistan. So what are the major objectives set for this market? That to create conditions for fair allocation of risk and benefits among the investors and consumers. So the risk shall and benefits shall be on a fair allocation. And there shall be a fair allocation of risk and benefit sharing among market players. And the second one is that to provide a levelized playing field. There shall not be any undue advantage or disadvantage to any player in the market. They must be competing on a level playing field. Well, for this, you need to remove all conflict of interest. If there is any conflict of interest, so then the confidence in the market cannot be built. And the other major objective is to improve efficiency from competition for the market. At the entry level, you need to compete to enter into the market, and that also you need to incentivize efficiency within the market, which is achieved through centralized economic dispatch. And the competition for the market, this is achieved new capacity procurement through competitive auctions. So these are the two mechanisms to achieve this goal. And the other is to the objective of the market is to ensure security of supply. There must be enough generation in the system to meet the system load, not more nor less. And the other major objective is to ensure transparency and predictability, which is very important to for the confidence in the market, that it must be transparent and it must be predictable. There must shall not be unpredictable changes in the legal policy or regulatory framework, which increases the risk for the investors or people playing in the market. So coming to a CTBCM main feature. So this is a kind of a scary figure, but it's very easy. Moving from the single buyer towards CTBCM, what is the major shift? The major shift is that in the CTBCM, the role of the CPPAG will not remain as it is, that it will no longer act as the single buyer. However, the generation companies will be contracted directly with the buyers. They will be directly in contact with no intermediate body in between. So they will be directly allowed to sell to the DESCOs, to the bulk power consumers. And as you see, in any competitive market, when there are multiple sellers and buyers, electricity being a non-storable commodity, there will be imbalances among the committed quantities and the actually withdrawn or generated quantities. So for that purpose, the market operator will settle the imbalances based on the marginal prices. So, it's very important to remark here that the CTBCM design takes into account all aspects, like how the existing PPAs will be treated, what should be done for the new PPAs to make them more flexible. Capacity obligations, which I will talk in detail, is a very important feature of the CTBCM. The grid code needs to be amended. There shall be a new commercial code for the market, and how the non-payment risks will be covered. So all these things are taken into account while designing or proposing a design for the wholesale market. So how the trading will work in CTBCM? So as I already explained, the CTBCM is constructed along a bilateral market in which the buyer and seller will have direct bilateral agreement with no party in between. The system operator, as the CTBCM, is based on a centralized economic dispatch model, which is also a legal binding in the NEPRA Act. The system operator will decide the dispatch of all power plants and will be responsible to establish the marginal price, which will be used for the settlement of imbalances, and also for the will be used as an index for market price. DISCOs, for the future procurement of DISCOs, and facilitating agency with the name of Independent Auction Administrator will be established, which will facilitate the DISCOs to procure their future commitments for the through competitive auctions. And these competitive auctions will also result the price for entry into this market. And eligible consumers, those consumers which have consumption of 1 megawatt and above, they will be free to sign bilateral contracts with electric power suppliers on negotiated tariffs. So this is the broader scheme of things. As in the international perspective slide, I talked about design parameters. There are about 8, and I will talk only about the 4 major design parameters, that what choices have been taken for the CTBCM. Regarding the products traded in the market and system reliability, how this is ensured, that in CTBCM there are 2 main products. One is the energy and the other is capacity. Energy will be traded to supply the consumption, and for the capacity product that ensures your reliability, the concept of firm capacity is introduced. The firm capacity is that it is equivalent to your capability to contribute to the system security in a stressed hour. So I will also, in the next slides, I'll talk in detail regarding the firm capacity as well, when I will be discussing the capacity obligation. So there are 2 products in CTBCM. One is the capacity and the other is energy. The other major design parameters in any market is the pricing mechanism, which is very important, that how your prices will be determined. So when we studied various international markets and study their evaluations, we learned that in all developing countries, the cost-based, to start from a cost-based pool model is the most suitable approach. So for CTBCM, we have adopted a cost-based pool model with a single market clearing price based on marginal cost principle. So there are no zonal prices or nodal prices. There will be one market clearing price that will be set through variable cost-based model. The other important parameter is the power procurement. How the future, how will this market cater for the future needs? So the bulk power consumers, they will be free to decide their own requirements on how they can procure. But for the DISCOs, which is the major chunk, which will be regulated entities, for these, a combined procurement mechanism is established with 100% capacity obligations. It means that how much capacity you need in the future, you must ensure in advance that 100% of that capacity has been contracted, has been committed. And this process will be facilitated by for the DISCOs by the Independent Auction Administrator. And market architecture is that in several markets there are day-ahead markets, there are intraday markets, but with the start of the CTBCM, we will have only balancing mechanisms for capacity and energy. The BME will cater for imbalances in the energy product, and while the BMC will cater for imbalances in the capacity product. So now going into the details of the main features, what is CTBCM? So the CTBCM is a wholesale market where electricity will be traded in bulk quantities. So it's not a retail market, it's a wholesale market where bulk consumers and bulk traders can buy and sell electricity. So the first and the foremost requirement of any competitive market is the establishment of an independent and impartial market operator, because all the settlements in the market are done through this entity. So its independence and its impartiality is very important. This plays a key role to enhance confidence of the market players. The second one is the dispatch operations. The system operator is also, because our market model is based on centralized economic dispatch, the decisions of the system operator sets the market price. So also the dispatch operation needs to be improved. So this is another major feature of the CTBCM. The dispatch, which is currently on manual operation, this will be a secure tool based, and it will be converted into a tool based, where medium and long term, medium term, and short term cost optimization tool will be used to improve the security constraint economic dispatch. And the generation adequacy, this will be ensured through capacity obligation. Each player will be required to contract enough capacity to contribute to the system security. And the new capacity of the DISCOs, this will be procured through centralized auctions being facilitated by the IAA. And for all the market-based transactions, these will be backed by the credit covers. So if there is no payment in the market, then you have no market. So in the market, all the transactions will be secured through credit covers. So there will be no non-payment risk. And also we have certain DISCOs which are, we can say, a weaker DISCO due to their geopolitical position in the countries. So until these DISCOs are reformed, the government support will be available to facilitate these DISCOs in order to procure further capacity if they are unable to provide the credit covers. And balancing mechanisms, as I stated already, that these are introduced to trade the imbalances in the energy and capacity based on market prices. And one of the major question in any competitive market development is that how you can integrate your legacy contracts into the new changing environment. So for this, there are several methods, around 6 and 8, which includes forced market integration, forced renegotiation, voluntary renegotiations. So we evaluated all these different methods regarding our local peculiarities, and finally the viable option was that the most suitable option is to commercially allocate these PPAs into the DISCOs, while legally they will remain the same, and they will be treated by an entity like the current CPPAG, which is the agent of the DISCOs and dealing with IPPs. This will be converted into a special purpose trader called the special purpose traders. This will take care of the legal perspective, legal part, but commercially these contracts will be treated as if these contracts are directly assigned to the DISCOs, like the IPPs are dealing with the DISCOs are purchasing directly from the IPP based on certain share, but legally it was not possible. We had evaluated this in detail, that legally it was not possible. So we have integrated these PPAs through a generation following design into the CTBCM while commercially allocating them to the DISCOs. And several rules and regulations needs to be further promulgated to regulate the functions of the market participants and service providers. And new flexibilities will be introduced, like today we have carved in stone PPAs where you can only sell to the single buyer and you need to compensate for the full cost. But in future we can see that now their market is being developed, so also there can be some flexibilities. There some part is sold to the market, some is sold to the regulated entities, and there will be a specific functions in the market operator called the contract registrar, which will check the validity of the contracts, that what kind of contracts can be registered or can be traded in the market. A new commercial code will be developed which will govern the operations of the market operator, and the existing commercial code will be amended in order to govern the operation of the special purpose trader as per the new environment, while taking into account the commercial allocation and other aspects of the market. Also, we need to change certain provisions of the grid code, where we need to incorporate the market design into, especially into the scheduling and dispatch code, meeting the data registration and planning codes. And also, strengthening of the institution is also one of the major tasks that needs to be undertaken. Like the most important functions are the MO, the SO. They needs to be strengthened in order to improve efficiency in their operations. And for transparency in any market, transparency is very important. That there is symmetry of information for everybody. The other one of the major important element of this market design is the capacity obligation. So the purpose of these capacity obligations is to ensure security of supply and generation adequacy in short, medium, and long term. So how this capacity mechanism will work? The capacity balancing mechanism works in this method, that all the entities that represent demand, whether these are suppliers or bulk power consumer directly participating, they will have the obligation to contract in advance sufficient capacity. So, sufficient capacity to meet their own load and also the system reserves requirements. So this capacity obligations will be calculated by the market operator and then communicated to all the market participants to contract in advance. So, and for this purpose, each market participant will be accountable for its own projections. It will be provided its future demand projection to the market operator to incorporate into the methodology to come up with the final capacity obligations. And whenever a contract comes for registration with the market operator, so with that entity, the contract registrar will verify whether this contract is fulfilling its capacity obligations or not, whether the party is trying to sign further contracts or not. So for the future, near future, almost 3 years, so all demand must be 100% contracted based on its own projections. And if there is any issue with the projection, so then we have the balancing mechanisms that will settle the imbalances. And future procurement for discos and price discovery. So future procurement for discos, this will be through competitive auctions. All capacity must come through competitive auction to the extent feasible. For certain projects, when competitive trading is not feasible, mostly for strategic ones, so these can come through other alternative choices, but the major chunk shall come through competitive auctions. There will be specific regulations and oversight by NEPRA for this competitive bidding, but currently NEPRA is setting the tariffs. In the future, NEPRA will not be setting those tariffs, but will be overseeing that how these tariffs are discovered, how the costs are discovered through competitions. The facilitating agency, the independent auction administrator, this will consolidate the requirements from all discos, that what are the needs of each individual discos, and then we'll consolidate this into a procurement plan. This plan will be approved by the regulator for the discos, and then a competitive tender will take place. Once the competitive tender takes place and is completed successfully, the IAA will nominate the successful bidders which have been on the auction. Then the successful bidder will go to NEPRA to approve tariffs that has come out as a result of the competitive auction. So after these tariffs are approved, then the NEPRA will be bound to pass these cost to end consumer tariffs. And now coming to the last part of the CTBCM implementation roadmap. So it, as I discussed already, that it's a major task and a proper planning is required for this task. So coming on the timelines, that in Q1, the approval by NEPRA was started for the detailed design and the CTBCM, which is expected to end by this September. After this September, we have almost 1.5 years for implementation, where different entities like NEPRA, MEPD, NTDC, PPIB, DISCOs, and CPPA will take different actions in order to make this happen. So comprehensive plan has been prepared for, and where actions for each entity has been identified and timelines has been set to complete those actions. And then we have a 6 months testing and parallel run, which and considering this whole timelines from September, so we will achieve the expected COD of the competitive market is by April 2022. Regarding the monitoring mechanisms, that how this whole process will be monitored, working groups of each entities has been established, which are working dedicatedly, and CPPAG has been facilitating these working groups in order to undertake their respective actions. Each entity is responsible for their own actions and is taking care of the task assigned to it by the policymakers and the regulator. And they have also submitted their implementation plans to the regulator, which will also be approved along with the approval of the detailed plan for CPPAG. On this, another layer of monitoring is the CPPAG has established a market implementation support committee in its board, which provide guidance as well as support to related to market operations. And the other is the market implementation and monitoring group, MIMG, which is a high-level body chaired by the Secretary of Water and Power and the Chairman EPRA. And this committee group is supported by the CEO CPPAG. So this will be providing the overall monitoring. And then the other layer is the Cabinet Committee on Energy, which will also be providing the policy guidelines and other support for implementation of this market. So with this, the introduction of the competitive market and its implementation plan. So now, Tala, you can ask questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Abrar, for your detailed presentation. We'll now take a few questions. The first question is, as per the license requirement for 2008, NTDC was mandated to develop wholesale market. What were the main challenges for its inability to set up such markets so far?
So this can be attributed. There are several factors that contributed to that. First, there was no push from the government in order to move into that direction. Secondly, NTDC was also a new entity at that time. So several factors contributed to that. And then when the push came almost after 2009, that we need to reform the sector and move towards more competition.
Thank you. The next question is single buyer model a necessary intermediary phase between before going into the wholesale competition market?
It cannot be said specifically that it's always necessary, but in case when the whole you have an IPP regime, then in that case, when you cannot integrate those IPPs into the market, then in the middle, so it's a gradual approach. Is first there is a vertically integrated utility. Normally the governments then want to incentivize debundling, specialization. So the first step, it's always not necessary, but it's the easy one. The first step that the government establishes is that this disintegrate into generation, transmission, and distribution sector. So when the generation part is separated, so now somebody has to buy this generation, and when the conditions are not ready to go into the market, what the government does is to establish a single buyer model. But it's not always a precondition. Like in the Latin America, they have gone directly from the vertical integration towards competition, wholesale markets. It's not always a requirement to establish a single wire model.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, in capacity obligation, who takes the risk of errors in projecting demand, or are all risk transferred to the consumers?
No. In this case, there are two players. One are the DISCOs, the other are the bulk power consumers, like the competitive suppliers. The competitive suppliers, they are like responsible for their own projections. If there is any error in their projections, so they will be penalized in the energy as well as capacity balancing mechanism. Regarding the DISCOs, so their forecast, it's recommended that it must be done accurately, and if there is any error, first of all, there is a balancing mechanism, so they will be treated in a fair manner. If there is any error, some DISCO has contracted less, some DISCO has contracted more, so it will be settled between the DISCOs on a fair market based price.
Thank you. The next question is, in Indian power market, only 10% of the electricity is traded through power exchanges. What would be the likely market share in Pakistan in the long term and in the short term?
Okay, yeah, in the Indian exchange, it's almost now including the deep platform, it's 10%, but the only exchange, if you can say, it's almost 3 to 4%. But in Pakistan, we have estimated that the share of the bulk power consumers, which can trade bilaterally, it's 16% of the total consumption. So in the near future, if conditions are favorable, so the market can develop in several 5 to 6 years up to that percentage. Up to 16% is the potential until now.
Okay, the last question is, how important do you think will be the role of privately owned distribution companies to make Pakistani market more competitive?
The distribution, so two distinctions needs to be made. One is the distribution and the other is the supplier business. Now these two business are combined, like the selling of electricity is called the supplying business and distribution is the wire business. So if you're talking about a distribution company, the wire business, even if it's a government owned or a private owned, this will be regulated by NEPRA. It's not a competitive business. But if you're talking about the distribution, the supply business, so they will play an important role once the conditions are ready and we are able to introduce the retail competition. So private participation is a must for retail competition, and they will be playing the major role, the leading role in introducing the retail competition.
Thank you, Mr. Abrar. We have now come to the end of our session. Thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we can collaborate in future as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear audience, our expert speakers for today emphasized on the importance of SAARC frame agreement, cross-border electricity trade, the offered benefits, and they shared the ongoing efforts to implement the SAARC framework agreement in its true spirit. To conclude the discussion, I'll summarize the important aspects discussed today. Number one is the ratification of SAARC frame agreement by all member states is crucial. Focus should now be on the implementation of SAARC framework agreement. Steps must be taken by individual member states to develop complementary regulatory frameworks and harmonize grid codes and standards that facilitate regional electricity trade. Appropriate regional forums can facilitate the dialogue in this regard. Strengthening CBET ties will help in ensuring sustainable development, transition towards clean and green energy, and meeting the climate change mitigation goals. Promotion of the cause of regional energy trade is one of the more focal areas of SAARC Energy Center, and the center has always regularly conducts activities to share knowledge on various aspects of cross-border electricity trade to help the member states reach the ultimate goal of establishment of SAARC Energy Ring. Dear audience, now at the end I would like to request the Deputy Director, SAARC Energy Center, to give his concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ahmed. Dear participants, let me begin by thanking the presenters of this video conference, which include Mr. Jivan Sharma from Asian Development Bank, Mr. Sabrajit Datta, and Mr. Sambit Kumar from PricewaterhouseCoopers of India, Mr. Rajiv Ratna from SAARC, and Mr. Abrar Hussain from CPPA Pakistan for sharing their knowledge and opinions on the status of implementation of SAARC framework agreement and future challenges, and their excellent response to the queries and the replies raised by the participants. All presenters shared very useful information through their presentations. I believe many good experiences and valuable lessons have been learned by all of us. I would also like to pay my earnest respect to all the participants for their enthusiasm and active participation in this video conference. I hope what you all have learned through this conference will help you understand the importance of the SAARC framework agreement and will urge you to support its cause in your own capacity. Moreover, I would also like to inform you all that SAARC Energy Center is organizing another video conference on 29th September this year to disseminate a research report on assessment of industry readiness for manufacturing of battery electric vehicles in SAARC countries. I would request you all to join us so that the research contents are disseminated to maximum number of professionals and the stakeholders, and a useful feedback is gathered for improvement of the research contents. Therefore, your participation, feedback, and recommendations would be very valuable to us. Finally, I would like to thank my own colleagues for organizing this event and ensuring its smooth execution. I thank you all once again for your participation and wish you a safe stay during this pandemic. With this, I officially announce the end of this video conference. Thank you for your attention. May God bless all of us. Thank you.